We now move on to business of the day. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Non-domestic rating, multipliers and private schools bill, second reading.
Now. The recent amendment in the name of Kevin Hollinrake has been selected. Minister to move the second reading, James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time. Madam Deputy Speaker, last month the Chancellor set out this government's first budget. That budget was a once-in-a-generation event to wipe the slate clean after 14 years of the Conservatives. At that budget, we laid the foundations for our number one mission of economic growth. Now, the scale of the mess that we inherited at the general election meant we had to take tough decisions on welfare, spending and tax. Those decisions have been difficult, but they have been necessary. They have enabled us to deliver economic stability and fix the public finances. Doing that is crucial to getting public services back on their feet and to giving businesses the confidence they need to invest and thrive. Madam Deputy Speaker, stability, certainty and predictability are highly prized by businesses when making decisions about where and how much to invest. In opposition, I spoke to businesses time and again about the importance of stability, and so in government we have made sure to deliver for them by publishing our corporate tax roadmap alongside the budget. In my meetings with businesses about what they need to succeed, the system of business rates also came up time and again too. I heard businesses criticise a system that is inflexible, that disincentivises investment and that places an unfair burden on those businesses on high streets across England. That is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the budget, the Chancellor confirmed our first steps toward creating a fairer business rate system that protects the high street, supports investment and is fit for the 21st century. We are determined to support high streets as they are places that bring people together and serve as focal points for economic activity. Their success is what people across the country want to see, and it is a priority for our government to deliver. Now, that is why, in our first bill on business rates of this Parliament, the government has prioritised making progress to rebalance the rates burden faced by high street businesses. The bill before us seeks to put into law the commitments made at the budget by enabling the introduction from 2026-27 of permanently lower tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties with rateable values below £500,000 that make up the backbone of high streets across England. We are determined to give those businesses a tax cut, and we know that must be fully funded in a very challenging fiscal context. For that reason, this bill also enables us to generate sustainable funding for those tax cuts through an increase of multipliers on the most valuable 1% of business properties in the country. This targeted approach captures the majority of large distribution warehouses, including those used by online giants, as well as other out-of-town businesses that draw footfall away from high streets. It will enable us to lock in new, permanently lower tax rates for core high street businesses, providing not only a tax cut, but also stability and certainty after the one-year retail, hospitality and leisure relief which has been precariously extended year by year since the pandemic. Our approach provides a permanent tax cut to help high street businesses succeed, alongside the certainty they need to invest and the means to pay for it within our tough fiscal rules. I'll give way.
I'm very grateful for the Minister giving way. He talks about certainty, but one of the biggest problems small businesses have is that so many things are happening at once. The NICS increase that's going on, the employment rights bill that's coming in, and now the levy that's been cut down from 70% to 40%. All of these have a cumulative effect that make a massive difference when my businesses, for a hairdresser that I met only this weekend, talks about how much of a problem that's going to be. How does that help engender stability for those small businesses who are going to have to wait for 2026?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks, but let me remind him that in the very difficult decision that we had to take around employer national insurance contributions, there is explicit protection in there for small businesses by virtue of more than doubling the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500, which will benefit hundreds of thousands of small businesses across the country. I suggest that he talk to businesses in his constituency about that. But we are not shying away from the fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, that difficult decisions were taken in the budget. And he might also consult the plans that his government left us with when we took office in July. Because, of course, if we hadn't taken any action on business rates, if we had pursued the plans that his government left in operation, the retail, hospitality and leisure relief would have ended entirely next April. It would have gone down to zero. There was a cliff edge looming next April. We have extended it, despite the tough fiscal circumstances, for another year at 40%. That is a reasonable way forward whilst we put in place these permanent reforms. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned, the measures in this bill to level the playing field for high streets are the beginning of our efforts to transform the system of business rates. Our ambition to go further is set out in the paper published alongside the budget, Transforming Business Rates. That paper sets out the government's priority areas for further reform to support investment and make the system fairer. It invites businesses and industry representatives to work with us in designing the best possible system for the future. And I am very grateful for all those businesses and representative bodies who I have spoken with in the last few weeks for their engagement on this already. We will consider what further the government should do to incentivise investment and growth, including by looking at the efficacy of improvement relief and empty property relief, the impact of losing small business rates relief on expanding businesses and the cliff edges within the current system. I will give way.
Minister for giving way. If he's looking for other methods by which public finances could be effectively deployed, will he look very carefully over the last decade during which small business rate relief has been used by second home owners to flip their property to business rating and therefore pay nothing at all under the small business rate relief. In Cornwall alone, that has resulted in over £500 million of taxpayers' money being paid out to wealthy second home owners through COVID aid and through the small business rate relief. So will he look at the way in which actually wealthy people have been incentivised to use that particular method to advantage themselves and to ensure we have a much fairer system which actually puts first homes before second homes?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman very much for his point, and he raises a really crucial point there about making sure the tax system is fair and that it supports the behaviour that we seek to incentivise through design of the tax system. And in fact, he leads me on quite neatly onto my next point, which is that as part of the Transforming Business Rates discussion paper, we've committed to consulting on adopting a general anti-avoidance rule for business rates in England, which may, whilst not necessarily attacking the exact problem he highlights, it does speak to that general issue about avoidance within the tax system in relation to business rates. We will also look at how the burden adjusts with the economic cycle, and we will assess the merit of further increasing the frequency of re-evaluations. I look forward, Madam Deputy Speaker, to working with businesses and representative organisations closely to deliver a business rate system that is fit for the 21st century, and that work begins today with the powers in this bill to deliver our permanent tax cut for high streets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier in my remarks, the tough decisions the Chancellor set out at the budget to deliver economic stability and fix the public finances enable us to give businesses the confidence they need to invest and to get public services back on their feet. One of those public services that is so crucial to breaking down barriers to opportunity is the education system. And that is why the government has prioritised making sure every child has access to the high-quality education they deserve.
Minister, I have to say this, and I think many others in this House have to say it as well, but just for the record, I've been raised on multiple occasions that there's a need for exemptions for religious schools. I'll give an example. The Free Presbyterian Church in Northern Ireland, whose expression of their faith and treasured beliefs do not sit comfortably with mainstream schooling, and there are many other faiths where that's the same. So does the Minister not agree that exemptions must be made at the very least for schools like these if government are determined to press on with this issue? Minister, on behalf of those churches and those faiths and those people, I have to say government has to think again.
Well, I thank the honourable member for a rare intervention from him, but may I make the point that this bill before us today is around business rates as it applies in England. I think some of the wider points he touches on may relate to VAT and the removal of the VAT exemption for private school fees in other countries and nations within the UK. That bill will obviously, those provisions as related to VAT will obviously be debated as part of the Finance Bill on Wednesday. So I'm sure if you'd like to raise comments during the debate on that bill, that might be a time when I can address them more specifically. Because today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're addressing business rates and the system that applies in England. And the reason why this is so important, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because every parent aspires to get the best education for their child, and we as a government are determined to make sure those aspirations are met. Now at the budget, the government announced an increase of per-pupil funding in real terms, with a £2.3 billion increase to the core schools budget for the financial year 25-26, including a £1 billion uplift in high-needs funding. This funding increase needs to be paid for, and so to help make that happen, the government is ending tax breaks for private schools as set out in our manifesto. This includes ending the eligibility of private schools in England that are charities for business rates charitable relief. The bill before us will do that, and its measures operate alongside the ending of the VAT exemption on private school fees, which I mentioned, which is being delivered through the Finance Bill that I will be presenting to the House on Wednesday, and together these measures will raise £1.8 billion a year by 29-30. I'll give way.
To the Minister for giving way. The bill makes provision to maintain charity status for an institution which is wholly or mainly concerned with providing full-time education for pupils with an EHCP, an education, health and care plan. But I wondered if the Minister could set out what the definition of wholly or mainly is, and what support's going to be put in place for councils to afford the burden of extra pupils moving into mainstream education, considering that they will be facing a double whammy of losing charitable status and the imposition of VAT on school fees, because Hampshire County Council is already under financial strain and is really facing crisis point by 2026-2027 under these proposals.
Well, thank the honourable member for her comments. The test of wholly or mainly concerned, as I will get on to explain in my remarks in a moment, relates to 50% or more of the pupils having an EHCP in relation to their educational needs, which specifies that their educational needs can only be met in a private school. I'll turn to some more detail about that in a moment. Of course, the funding for the state education system overall is something which the government has prioritised in this budget, and that increase of £2.3 billion, which I mentioned, including a £1 billion uplift in high needs funding, is of course only possible because of the difficult decisions we have taken about taxation, including those before us today. I'll give way.
Thank the Minister for giving way. Would the Minister agree with me that actually prioritising state schools in the way that we're doing in this budget is something that should be really welcomed? And certainly talking to teachers in my constituency of Harlow, that for the first time in 14 years they feel hope with this Labour government. Don't you think it's shocking that the party opposite are still bemoaning the cut of the removal of the tax exemption for private schools rather than focusing on mainstream education where 96% of children go to?
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend for his remarks, and he's absolutely right that we as a government are focused on improving state education for children across the country, because we know every parent aspires for their child to get the best possible education. That is what our plans seek to achieve, and I would of course welcome the opposition supporting our efforts to that for the good of children right across the country. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, at committee stage, honourable and right honourable members will have the chance to scrutinise the detail of this bill, but at today's second reading, I will just spend a few moments giving a bit more of an outline about how the provisions in this bill are intended to operate and what our intentions behind them are. Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. On his points about independent schools, does he recognise that there are many independent schools like Lady Eleanor Hollis and Hampton School in my constituency that are involved in a huge amount of partnership working with schools in disadvantaged areas like Feltham's Reach Academy, helping those disadvantaged children to actually get opportunities they would not otherwise get? Does he recognise that both the measures in this bill and the VAT introduction on private school fees will actually lessen that partnership work, which will have a detrimental impact on many state schools?
Well, I thank the honourable member for her intervention, but I think what will have a positive impact on state schools across the country is the extra funding which we announced in the budget. And, you know, I'd just say this gently, Madam Deputy Speaker, to members on the opposition benches, which is that if you want to support extra funding for schools, you've got to support some of the tough decisions to raise that revenue in the first place. You can't have it both ways. I know the new leader of the opposition is very keen to oppose tax rises, but claims she supports the investment. But you can't have it both ways. If you want to support extra funding for schools, the NHS and for other public services, you have to have some responsibility and accept the decisions we are taking or propose those of your own. Now, may I make... OK.
I'm very grateful. As he sets out the workings of the bill, as he just said it a second ago, will he confirm the continuation of small business rates relief for the rest of this Parliament?
Thank you. I will get on to some details about business rates in a moment, and the honourable gentleman will have a chance to respond in full in just a moment. I see he's impatient to tell us how much he supports this bill today, perhaps, or is that not what? Am I misreading the signs from across the dispatch box? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've mentioned, this bill will enable the introduction of new multipliers to the business rate system from 26-27. The provisions in this bill will enable the introduction of 2 lower tax rates, which may only be applied to qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties. Now, the detail of the definition of qualifying properties will ultimately be set out in secondary legislation, but for the avoidance of doubt, it is our intention that the scope of these new tax rates broadly follows that used for current retail, hospitality and leisure relief. These new rates will provide permanent tax cuts, offering certainty to businesses by ending the continued uncertainty of retail, hospitality and leisure relief that has been rolled over annually since COVID-19. Our intention is for a lower rate that offers a tax cut for retail, hospitality and leisure properties that currently pay the standard multiplier with a rateable value between £51,000 and £499,999. Another rate will offer a larger cut to the retail, hospitality and leisure properties currently paying the small business multiplier, those with a rateable value of less than £51,000. But we are clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that any tax cut must be sustainably funded. And for that reason, the bill also enables the introduction of higher multipliers, which can only be applied to the most valuable properties, those with a rateable value of £500,000 and above. This represents less than 1% of all properties in England. The rates for any new multipliers will be set at Autumn Budget 2025 in the light of the outcomes of the 2026 revaluation. The Government recognises, however, that it would be inappropriate to take unfettered powers that allow Government to change tax liabilities by unlimited amounts, and for that reason, the bill includes sensible guardrails to limit the use of these powers. These guardrails determine that the 2 lower tax rates, when introduced, may not be set lower than 20p below the small business non-domestic rating multiplier. They determine that the higher tax rates, when introduced, may not be set higher than 10p above the non-domestic rating multiplier. And I would like to take this opportunity to make clear that these values are maximum parameters and do not represent the changes we intend to implement. They are guardrails that offer sensible limits with proportionate flexibility. They make sure the Government can respond to future revaluations as well as the changing economic and fiscal context. And as I have said, the exact rates for 26-27 will be set out at next year's budget. Now, alongside these provisions on multipliers, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill, as I've mentioned, also makes provisions relating to private schools that will raise around £140 million a year. We know there are over 2,400 private schools in England, of which approximately half are charities and are able to benefit from business rates charitable relief. This bill removes the eligibility of private schools that are charities for this relief. The bill provides a specific definition of a private school as a school that provides full-time education for pupils of compulsory school age where fees or other consideration are payable for that education, or an institution that is wholly or mainly concerned with providing education suitable to the requirements of pupils over compulsory school age but under 19, and where that education is provided to those pupils full-time is wholly or mainly for a fee or consideration. Now, I know that a number of honourable and right honourable members have raised questions over how the Government's plans will affect pupils with special educational needs and disabilities. I and my officials have carefully considered the design of this policy, and the provisions in this bill mean that private schools that are charities that are wholly or mainly providing education for pupils with an education, health and care plan will remain eligible for charitable rate relief. And to be clear, to the Honourable Lady's earlier question, the definition of wholly or mainly in business rates generally means 50% or more. The government believes that this will ensure the majority of special educational needs schools will not be affected by this measure. This measure will operate in addition to the existing business rates exemption for properties used by private schools that are wholly used for the training or welfare of disabled people. This exemption, which we are retaining, means these types of properties pay no business rates at all, and taken together, the existing and new provisions are intended to make sure that most private special educational needs schools will not be affected by the removal of charitable rate relief. I'll give way.
A terrible SEND crisis for special educational needs across this country, do you really think it's good enough that most of those schools will be exempt?
Well, I hope the honourable member will welcome the fact that we have committed an extra £1 billion next year in 25-26 to high needs funding in the education system. This government is committed to reforming England's SEND provision to improve outcomes and to return the system to financial sustainability, and I'd welcome her support for our measures in that regard. Now, I'm going to make some progress. I will give way one last time.
I appreciate him making the carve-out on the SEND. I'd be grateful if he'd be able to give us some statistics, though. He said most will be carved out. But actually, has the government done any work to work out exactly how many schools will still fall underneath, and equally how many will be cut out? And if not, that impact assessment placed in the library would be useful for the members across the House.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I would point him toward a document which has already been published, the removal of eligibility of private schools for businesses rates charitable relief, which sets out the impact and all the figures which he requests. There are 2,444 private schools in England, 1,139 are charities, and we expect that under our plans, 1,040 will lose relief, with the schools which are wholly or mainly concerned with provision for children with an EHCP that specifies their educational needs can only be met in a private school. They retain that access to charitable rates relief. But I hope if he reads that document, it will give him some of the statistics that he requests. Madam Deputy Speaker, I might add just a few more details in case they help honourable members' understanding of this policy, which is to confirm that standalone nurseries with their own rates bills are not within the scope of the bill, and if they are charities, they will retain their eligibility for the existing relief. In addition, the bill references independent training providers, which provide valuable vocational training courses on behalf of the government, ensuring that there are suitable further education opportunities for all. Now, because of the funding mechanism used by the government to fund independent training providers to provide full-time education and training for 16 to 19-year-olds, the bill provides a specific carve-out to ensure that these institutions will not be affected by the measures in this bill. As previously announced, it is the government's intention that this measure will come into effect from April the 1st, 2025, and as business rates is a devolved tax, the measures within this bill will only apply in England. Madam Deputy Speaker, the measures in this bill seek to play their part in bringing the change that this government was elected to deliver. The powers to introduce new multipliers serve as first steps on the road to transforming the business rate system. We are determined to transform the business rate system to support our high streets in a sustainable way, to offer stability and promote investment, and to drive the economic growth that is our mission as a government. Our vision of a modern business rate system is one that helps create wealth and decent jobs in every part of the country, and that makes sure that high streets serve as the heart of local communities. We are also determined to break down barriers to opportunity and to help all parents to achieve their aspirations for their children. That is why this bill makes changes to the relief from business rates that private schools that are charities can currently enjoy, raising crucial funding to help make sure that every child has access to the high-quality education they deserve. This bill delivers change. Change is what the British people voted for, and I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call the Shadow Minister, Kevin Hollinrake.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to open this debate on behalf of His Majesty's opposition. The Conservative Party has a proud record of supporting businesses on the High Street. We cut business rates to support small businesses, including doubling small business rates relief from £6,000 up to £15,000 and almost trebling higher rate relief from £18,000 to £51,000. We increased the frequency of business rate revaluations, making our business rate system fairer for businesses and more responsive to local economic trends, helping businesses to invest, create jobs and grow. The contrast with this business-bashing Labour government could not be greater. Not only have they brought forward a massive new red tape for business by means of the Employment Rights Bill, I note the RPC released its commentary on the impact assessment today, which has said it is not fit for purpose. The £5 billion of annual cost to businesses, it said it could be much higher and received a red rating. They've also imposed huge new tax increases on business, and the worst thing, they weren't even man enough to tell businesses they were going to do it. Quite the opposite, which is why, much as he says that businesses have confidence in his plans, the IOD have said they've seen the biggest one-month fall in investment confidence in their history. The CBI have today said 50% of their members will reduce headcount and two-thirds are scaling back hiring. Is that the kind of growth he imagined he would bring forward with his legislation? Infamously, the party opposite promised in their manifesto not to raise national insurance. Next week, we will have the second reading of the bill which reneges completely on that promise by raising employer national insurance contributions by £24 billion a year. They've also hit businesses by the family farms tax and our best family businesses in other sectors by halving business property relief. Can I remind him that family businesses employ 13.8 million people in this country and pay over £200 billion every year in taxes? They are killing the geese that lay the golden eggs. The party opposite also promised in their manifesto to replace the business rate system so we can raise the same revenue but in a fairer way. This system, it said, will level the playing field between the high street and online agents. The Deputy Prime Minister said in a speech to this House on the 12th of May 2022, she said she would scrap business rates to help our high streets flourish. The Treasury Minister himself also stated his party's intention to scrap business rates to this House on the 25th of October 2023. The bill before us today breaks these promises also. This bill does not replace or scrap the business rate system. Not only that, as a result of this bill and the measures in the budget, business rates are actually going up, both for online companies and for businesses on our local high streets. Yet more broken promises from a government of broken promises. But perhaps the government don't realise exactly what they are doing. Perhaps because their cabinet have no experience of starting and running a business. And shamefully, there has been no consultation with businesses about these changes. And true to form, the government has not published a full regulatory impact assessment alongside this bill on the changes to business rates multipliers. It is a discourtesy to this House and to our constituents for the government to refuse to consult with businesses, to refuse to consider the impact their policies will have, and to refuse to publish the information that would allow members of this House to scrutinise these plans properly, instead to use their majority to ram through the half-baked, damaging measures in this bill. I'm happy to give way.
Thank the Shadow Minister. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I find it more than ludicrous to hear the Tories lecturing Labour about red tape. I mean, what you have served up to this country through Brexit and the damage you have done to our economy is a disaster. And you masquerading as...
Relevant to the speech in hand. No need for that performance. Shadow Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for his intervention, but to remind him it wasn't the Conservative Party that voted to leave the European Union, it was the people of this country, and we respect democratic mandates. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope every member of the government benches who walks through the lobby to support this bill tonight realises the price their constituents will pay for that decision. If the government won't publish the likely consequences of this bill, let me try and set out what I believe the consequences will be. The government claims to be cutting business rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses in England, but that is not the case. The business rate relief for retail, hospitality and leisure that we introduced cuts 75% of bills. But this support is being reduced by the Labour government, almost halving that relief to 40%, meaning shops, restaurants, cafes, pubs, cinemas, music venues, gyms and hotels will all see their business rates rise. I'm very happy to give away.
That 75% retail, hospitality and leisure relief, was that due to expire in April 2025?
As he knows, we renewed every year since 2021. Every year since 2021. This party supports businesses. And you know, when that 75% was passed on in England, the same monies, Madam Deputy Speaker, the same monies were provided to Scotland and Wales. What did Wales do? They only passed on the 40%, not the 75%. That's their attitude to business. We support businesses. They don't, because they don't understand it. Businesses are facing a stealth tax from Labour with this rise of £925 million in rates next year. This will add over £5,000 to the business rates bill for the average pub, on top of the £5,000 per year extra costs for national insurance rises. It will also add over £9,000 to the rates bill for the average restaurant, on top of the £12,000 national insurance increases, £21,000 in total per annum for that typical business. There will also be an increase of up to £2.7 billion in 2026 through higher business rates through the new multipliers, despite Labour's manifesto promise not to increase the amount raised by the levy. These tax rises, as the CBI has said again today, will be passed through to workers through lower wages and to consumers through higher prices, making a mockery of their claim that they would not raise taxes for working people. The British Retail Consortium has warned the government that the sheer scale of new costs and the speed with which they occur create a cumulative burden that will make job losses inevitable and higher prices a certainty. The bill before the House today will replace the retail, hospitality and leisure relief with a lower multiplier for businesses with a rateable value below £500,000. And this will be funded by the new higher rate multiplier for premises with a rateable value of over £500,000, as the Minister set out. Setting the threshold at the higher level is a blunt instrument. I can assure the Government this will have consequences for businesses that are not big online retailers. This will hit large supermarkets, supermarket delivery, large department stores, football and cricket clubs, conference centres, airports. Some of the people that will levy the new charges on pay tens or hundreds of billion pounds in rates. At the maximum level, it will mean a 20% increase to that rates bill. It is no wonder that the outgoing Chief Executive, John Lewis, has criticised Labour's lack of business rates reform and has warned that, alongside the national insurance increase, this is a two-handed grab from businesses. This is why the Cold Chain Federation has warned that the business rates changes and the next increases could lead to the cost of food and medicine going up, which might be a double whammy for consumers, as the NFU has warned that the cost of food will go up because of the family farm tax. The Labour government doesn't seem to have thought this through. The party opposite used to say that the business rate system created uncertainty, but now KPMG have described the government's plan to change the business rate system, as set out in this bill, as creating uncertainty for businesses. The bill is also silent on the matter of small business rates relief, a lifeline for many businesses on our high streets. I ask him again, in his closing remarks, or perhaps his colleague on the front bench, would they confirm that it is their intentions to retain small business rates relief for the rest of this Parliament? Business is listening and it needs to know. Deputy Speaker, let me address the sting in the tail of this bill, Labour's education tax. I know my right honourable friend, the Shadow Education Secretary, feels very passionately that the government is making the wrong decision on this, as do all members in this party. This bill is part of their education tax. Removing the charitable rate relief from private schools that are charities goes in hand in glove with the utterly wrong-headed, anti-aspirational and counterproductive policy of charging VAT on private school fees. I'm happy to give way. Of course.
Minister Gilway on that point. One of the Shadow Minister could tell us how many state schools there are in his constituency and whether we would talk so passionately about those when talking about the decisions that this government are making to actually support state schools.
Well, this bill is about raising rates on private schools. That's why I mention it. But I'm very happy to talk in glowing terms about the state schools in my constituency, including the one I attended as a boy and the ones my children went to too. I am for state schools, but I'm also for independent education. Why is it either or? Why would anyone ever tax education? Will you give way? Happy to give way.
Campaign Against School Cuts website estimates the combined school cuts over since 2010 in Thirsk and Malton, his constituency, as over £70,000. Could he point to where in the public record he spoke out about that?
I was part of the fairer funding formula for schools in my area and the worst funded local authorities in the country. And can I reassure him that the schools in my constituency have improved under the stewardship of this government, which is surely the key metric, not just how much money you put in.
I'm very grateful for the Shadow Minister giving way. And isn't the point here that the impact of putting VAT and taxing these private schools means that we know thousands of pupils are going to move out into the state system, which takes away that funding and already impacts them, and no mitigation has been put in place? The Education Secretary said 3,000 was not the correct number, but would not put out the number of pupils that have moved. This is numbers that they know the government needs to come clean, because that is going to eat away all the tax raising they're going to make.
He's absolutely right. To 90,000 pupils, I understand, transferring over to the state sector as a result of these plans. It is a principle that we Conservatives hold firmly onto, that education should not be taxed. The only other nation to have tried was Greece, who abandoned their policy within months due to the disastrous consequences. The Independent Schools Council have said that some independent schools will close entirely and others scale back the education they offer, causing significant upheaval and disruption to the lives of tens of thousands of children. And surely, as night follows day, this will mean fewer children going to private schools and increased pressure on state schools. I'd be grateful if the Minister could enlighten me about whether this policy complies with Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The Legal Issues Memorandum considers the principle of non-discrimination regarding the difference in treatment between private schools and state schools, but not between private schools that are charities and other charities that will still qualify for charitable rates relief. I look forward to the Minister's clarification. During our time in government, England became one of the top-performing countries for education in the Western world, a legacy this government seems determined to trash. In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill may be short, but is long on disastrous consequences. I implore members opposite to think about their local schools, their high street businesses who are about to be clobbered, their resultant job losses, higher prices and boarded up shop fronts. I ask all members to think about what is in the best interests of their constituents and do the right thing and vote against this bill this evening.
The original question that the bill be now read a second time, since when an amendment has been proposed, as on the order paper, the question is that the amendment be made. Appended be made. Marvellous. And the debate will now continue, and I call Adam Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll focus today on the removal of the eligibility of private schools for charitable business rates relief. Before I was elected to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was a scientist, but before I was a scientist, I was trained as a secondary school teacher myself. In school, I saw firsthand the dedication and resilience of my colleagues, but I also bore witnesses to the challenges that they faced. Challenges that led many teachers to leave the profession after only a few years. I myself left after only my training year, citing the unsustainability of marking books at 1 o'clock in the morning planning lessons through the weekend, never seeing my family as the reasons that I couldn't continue in the profession, despite loving being a teacher. Indeed, I chose to leave the profession to do something I feel is much easier myself, take a doctorate in engineering. 10 years ago, when I teaching had a profound retention issue. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is worse. Now, 1 in 10 new teachers leave after just 1 year in the role, 1 in 4 after just 3 years, and a little over half of the teachers see their career last more than 10 years. Many are outstanding teachers who don't want to leave the profession. To now, I miss teaching every day. The picture in our education system gets worse, I think, when you look to maths and science in particular, subjects which I know the whole House believes are vital. The maths teacher shortage began in 2012, and in 2023, the intake of new maths teachers was just 60% of the government target. I, myself, was a physics teacher, and there were in 2023, there were 6 times the number of vacancies for science teachers than there were in 2010. In my view, the failures of the previous government's education policy led to this abysmal current state of affairs, and they are profoundly unacceptable. Yes, I will give way. Yep.
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and I appreciate he's talking with personal experience about a really important part of our education system, but he's talking a lot about teachers, and he's talking a lot about the failed education policy of the previous government. Would he like to take a moment just to recognise the vast improvements in our performance in international league tables, the reduction, the fall in the attainment, the disadvantage gap in the years leading up to COVID-19, at least give some credit to the outputs, not just the inputs?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think I will come to some of these points further in my speech if he's willing to hang on for a few minutes. I think I'd just like to continue. But I trained as a teacher when the former Member of Parliament for Surrey Heath was Education Secretary. The former member made significant changes to the education system, as the honourable member has just alluded to there, during his tenure, but changes that I and the vast majority of my colleagues at the time strongly disagreed with. Changes that ignored, in my opinion, decades of pedagogical research and favoured metrification of our children over learning. Changes that harkened back to the rote learning of 50 years ago and set pedagogy back by decades. Austerity was already being very much felt in the sector as well. Teachers were being expected to put the same effort in, but with fewer resources and with their pay frozen. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is worse. After a decade of Conservative education secretaries following in the former member for Surrey Heath's footsteps, teacher pay has taken a significant real terms cut. In many ways, the former member inspired me to enter politics as a Labour member, a sentiment I know many of my colleagues on these benches share exactly. Members opposite may challenge why I raise these points, but I think they're all part of what this bill is about, keeping teachers in their jobs, paying them fairly and giving them the resources that they need to give your children the education that they deserve. The previous government set a goal that all children should finish Year 11 with at least GCSEs in maths and English, a laudable goal which has my full personal support. Yet last year, not even half of children achieved that goal, just 45% in England. Only one state secondary school in my constituency in Erewash attained results above that average, and even that top-performing school saw just half of their children in Year 11 with GCSEs in maths and English. Every other state secondary school in my constituency was below that 45% average. At the worst performing, it was fewer than a third. I should note, Madam Deputy Speaker, I place none of the blame for these issues with the local schools themselves. I've met with several local heads and many teachers, all of whom, it is powerfully obvious to me, have made incredible sacrifices to deliver excellence in our local education system, but all of whom have been burned by the failures of education reforms introduced throughout the last decade. The people of Erewash elected a Conservative Member of Parliament in 2010, in 2015, 2017 and 2019, and in return, the previous government let their children down. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been talking a lot about state schools in this speech, which is only natural when they're the schools that 94% of our children attend. I would also like to highlight, however, the major independent school in my constituency, Trent College in Long Eaton. In the run-up to and since the election, I've been around as many of the schools in Erewash as I can. and Trent College is no exception to this. I've spoken many times to staff and pupils both this weekend. In fact, I attended a show put on by the incredible Wildflower Community Choir at the school's chapel. It's a wonderful school with excellent staff led by the brilliant Bill Penty. The staff provide fantastic opportunities to all the pupils who attend. Their facilities are the best I've ever seen in a school, and the staff do a huge amount for our community. But it is a simple fact that the vast majority of my constituents cannot afford to send their children to Trent College, and that many of their pupils come from outside of my constituency. A great part of what this bill is making sure that the incredible opportunities received by the children at Trent College, the aspirations they are encouraged to have, are available to all children in Erewash. I want every child in Erewash and the country to receive the best education they possibly can, and this bill will support extending these opportunities to every child in every state school in Erewash and the country. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's giving a thoughtful and impassioned speech. I wonder, notwithstanding his support for the government policies, whether he regrets the fact that it's being introduced midway through the year, so that children, including children with special educational needs, are going to find themselves struggling to get involved with the curriculum and indeed to fulfil the examinations for which they have put in a lot of effort and preparation.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I would remind him that if the members opposite did not want us to have to take drastic measures to re-establish our country's economy, they shouldn't have left a £22 billion black hole in it. I'd also like to flag today, Madam Deputy Speaker, a particular failure in the current education system, brought to crisis by the previous government, and that is the provision of special educational needs and disability, i.e. SEND education. SEND education has long been under-supported, and after the past decade, now it is worse. Members on the opposition benches will claim that this bill will make SEND provision worse still. Well, let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for SEND children and their families in my constituency and across Derbyshire, it is scarcely conceivable that things could get any worse. Some 20% of the casework that I receive in my office is related to special educational needs and disabilities problems. The recent Ofsted report on SEND services offered by the Conservative-run Derbyshire County Council found that it had widespread weaknesses, that communication with parents is poor, and that children's needs are often not accurately identified or provided for. This report is utterly damning, the worst Ofsted report I have ever seen, and Derbyshire County Council's failures are extreme. For my constituents, the local elections cannot come soon enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very pleased, however, when the Chancellor announced in the budget an extra £1 billion to support SEND services. Having spoken extensively to parents of SEND children in my constituency, they aren't worried about whether or not private school fees might increase. They're worried about whether or not their children will be able to go to school at all. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is about providing equality of opportunity. It is about ensuring that a child's postcode or their parents' income does not determine their chances in life. This bill will provide funds to fix our state schools, reverse the bite of austerity, get more teachers into school and help them stay there, make sure all children are properly included and, ultimately, provide them with the education that they all deserve. I feel strongly that supporting this bill is my duty to my constituents in Erewash, its schools, its teachers, its children, their parents and the future of our towns and villages. It is my duty, therefore, to vote for this bill.
I now call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Great British High Street is on life support. Many bricks and mortar businesses are barely surviving, and where they are, it is often against the odds. Changes in our trading relationship with Europe, the COVID pandemic, energy prices, the cost of living, and the Conservatives' disastrous mini-budget have all taken their toll. But one measure which has stifled high street businesses more than any other for years has been the broken business rate system. The business rate system is unfair on companies, it is bad for our local communities and damaging for our national economy. It penalises manufacturers when they invest to become more productive and energy efficient. It leaves pubs and restaurants with disproportionately high tax bills, and it puts brick and mortar shops at an unfair disadvantage compared to online retail giants. In too many places, pubs, restaurants and shops are being forced to close, taking with them jobs, opportunities and treasured community spaces. and consumers are seeing the cost of this unfair tax passed on to them. More broadly, this outdated system inhibits business investment, job creation and economic growth, holding back our national economy, yet for too long it has been allowed to continue. In its 2019 manifesto, the previous Conservative government promised a fundamental review of business rates to ease the tax burden on smaller businesses. Yet, in 2022, when I challenged the former Chancellor, now the Right Honourable Member for Godalming and Ash, on his personal commitment to making it happen, he admitted in this place that it was another of the promises I now vainly wish I had not made. Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses are tired of being treated with such cynicism and relying on a patchwork of last-minute temporary reliefs. They can't plan, they can't invest, and they can't grow. They are crying out for fundamental reform and a new, fairer system. Before this autumn budget, Liberal Democrats called on the Chancellor to reform business rates completely with a new system and to do so no later than April 2026. The new system, we believe, should be based on our Liberal Democrat calls for a commercial landowner levy, a bold move that would deliver a real shot in the arm for our high streets. But instead of pursuing fundamental reform, instead of fair reform, this bill will be just more tinkering. Rates relief has been a sticking plaster, but boy, is that plaster being ripped off in April with a big reduction in relief. And many small businesses are now saying that the increase in business rates, combined with the increase in national insurance contributions, will be too much for them to absorb.
Would my old friend give way?
I would.
I'm very grateful to my old friend, and she's making an excellent case. And apart from the point made in my previous intervention with regard to the abuse or the opportunity for abuse under the rate relief system, particularly by holiday homes, would she also accept that the methodology used by the current rating system with regard to the parking spaces in out-of-town retail outlets such as supermarkets puts a massive advantage on the part of those supermarkets in comparison with the town centre shops, and that really we need a rating system which actually levies a rate on that benefit at a level which ensures there's an even playing field.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. He's absolutely right that the broken business rate system is unfair in many ways, and it is the big giants, whether they're online or otherwise, that are getting an easier ride. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill fails to address many other problems with business rates. For example, it does nothing to support businesses outside the three sectors of retail, hospitality and leisure, excluding key sectors that are particularly negatively affected by the current system, such as manufacturing. It does not address the £51,000 cliff edge. Properties with a value over that threshold are not eligible for the small business multiplier, even though they are small businesses. And with the rates relief going down, business rates bills for small businesses will go up. From next April, business rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure will be cut from 75% to 40%, and this bill does nothing to avert that blow. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that he wanted to rebalance business rates. Sorry, is an intervention? No, right, OK, just some chuntering. Excellent. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll carry on. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that he wants to rebalance business rates, and I welcome that direction of travel if it turns out to be true. But without an impact assessment, I'm particularly worried about unintended consequences, and I say this in the spirit of constructive opposition. It appears as though the government is moving from a system of temporary relief to a lower multiplier. At the moment, a small business enjoys 75% business rates relief, but a very large chain has their relief capped at £100,000. If I have understood it correctly, independent shops will see their relief drop from 75% to 40%, whilst big chains, such as pubcos, supermarkets and others, may see their relief uncapped, which could give them a tax reduction of tens of millions of pounds. I would be grateful if the Minister could write to me to share some modelling to reassure me that this is not going to happen and that we will not see independent businesses inadvertently subsidising big chain stores and multinationals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the impact of the government's changes to business rates are going to have an absolutely massive effect on small businesses in my constituency. The oldest pub in Britain, as they claim, ye oldie fighting cocks, will see a whopping increase in their business rates alone of £30,000 per year. The Save St Albans Pubs campaign say that even an average pub in St Albans with a rateable value of £100,000 will now face an additional £19,000 in their business rates bill from April. If we assume that an average pub makes 30p profit per pint, each of those pubs would need to sell an extra 60,000 pints per year. That's almost 1,200 pints extra a week, and that is even before factoring in national insurance contribution increases. But there are other low-margin, large premises businesses, such as children's soft play and activity centres, who will also lose out under these changes. DJ's Play is a much-loved indoor play centre. There's many of them across Hertfordshire, and they exist in large warehouse-style premises. The buildings are large, but the profit margins are not. DJ Play and many others like them provide a valuable and enriching educational experience for children, but they too will struggle to keep their heads above water. Madam Deputy Speaker, we Liberal Democrats are also opposed to this bill, which would levy a tax on education by removing the business rates exemption for private schools that are charities. We are opposed in principle to the taxation of education because it is a public good. We also believe that parents must be given choice when it comes to their children's education. Many families feel, whether it's due to issues with bullying, SEND provision, mental health issues or other factors, that the state system cannot meet their child's needs. I would give way.
Thank you. At the start of the coalition government, one of the first things that they voted on was to scrap the Building Schools for the Future programme, which impacted schools in my constituency. Schools in my constituency, including Calder High School, Brooksbank and Todmorden High School. I wonder if the member opposite would reflect that that was a mistake by her party, and if that has actually stopped. And I wonder if that stopped schools being able to provide for more students.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his intervention. He may know that during those coalition years, both the health and education day-to-day budgets were protected, and it was after the Liberal Democrats left the coalition in 2015 that capital budgets were serially raided to pay for day-to-day spending. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I was saying on this point, there are almost 100,000 children with SEND in private education without education, health and care plans, and it will be those families who bear the brunt of this measure. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we Liberal Democrats have tabled our own reason amendment setting out the reasons why we are against this bill, but I do have a number of questions for the Minister, and I'd be grateful if he could address these in his summing up. Will there be an impact assessment that sets out the impact on small businesses on high streets? Will the Minister exclude any new investment from business rates valuations from April, so businesses that are able to invest in their future won't see that investment pushing up their rates bills even higher? Will the Minister think again and complete the consultation before unfreezing the rates relief, which could badly affect small businesses and our high streets? And will the Minister confirm whether or not the change from a system of capped temporary relief to an uncapped lower multiplier may inadvertently end up with small businesses subsidising big corporations? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government says that it wants growth, and so do we. But these business rates changes will stifle the growth of small businesses and high streets at a time when we should be unleashing it. We urge ministers to think again.
I call Sureena Brackenridge.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like my honourable friend from Erewash, I too will speak about the removal of charitable tax status on private schools. But I stand here not just as a Labour MP for Wolverhampton North East, but as someone who has spent over 25 years working in state secondary schools as a science teacher and as a deputy head teacher. My experiences in classrooms have shown me the stark realities of the funding disparities across our education system. Removing the charitable tax status on private schools is necessary and fair. In recent years, and many school staff working in state schools across the country will empathise with me here when I talk about something as basic as a class set of glue sticks or a reliable access to working printers has become simply a luxury. We'd have to make tough choices, struggling to provide subject department capitation budgets on subjects like science, art, design and technology and music, with the resources needed so students can thrive with hands-on learning. We're struggling to fix leaking roofs or fund much-needed support services for vulnerable students. These are not decisions that any school leader should face, but they are the reality in too many state schools. Contrast that with the resources available to private schools, which benefit from charitable tax exemption, giving them a financial advantage. It is fair that while state schools struggle to afford basic supplies, private schools enjoy tax breaks that widen this gap. Is that fair? I think not. The gulf divide in top GCSE results between private schools and state schools is vast. This year, almost 50% of the GCSEs taken by private school students got at least a grade 7, while less than 20% of results from students in comprehensives and academies reached that same level. By removing tax exemptions on private schools, we have the opportunity of generating an estimated more than £1.5 billion annually. These funds will catalyse the transformation needed in our state schools. So imagine recruiting and retaining more talented teachers, modernising ageing buildings, expanding student wraparound support services and ensuring that every child, no matter where they're from, has access to high-quality education. This isn't about punishment, it's about fairness. Now, some will argue that this policy could drive up fees, putting private education out of the reach for some families. But let's be clear, private schools are businesses, and many have financial reserves, endowments and donations that they can draw upon. They can adapt just as state schools and school leaders like myself had to adapt and balance constrained budgets for many years. This new government's record for education will be one for fairness and equity. We're investing in early years education, free breakfast clubs, great quality apprenticeships and staff recruitment and retention. But we need resources to make these ambitions a reality. Removing charitable tax exemptions is a necessary and responsible step in building an education system where a child's potential is not defined by their family's wealth. I've seen what state schools can achieve when they're given the resources that they deserve. When a child who once struggled to find their confidence suddenly excels because they have finally the support that they need. Removing tax exemptions from private schools isn't just a policy to me. For the students that I've taught, for the colleagues that I've worked alongside, and for the countless young people still awaiting for their opportunity, this is about fairness, just as they deserve.
Damian Hinds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my time as a junior minister at the Treasury, there's one important thing I learned was that there's a really good argument against every tax. So VAT is inflationary, corporation tax reduces investment, income tax disincentivises work, excise duties fall more heavily typically on lower income groups and so on. And as a result of that, the policy tends to be, well, we'll do a little bit of a large number of taxes, and that's not a bad policy. But business rates are particularly troublesome because of their fixed cost nature, the fact they don't flex to businesses' sales or profitability or to the business cycle, which means that they can exacerbate the effect of downturns in the economy or headwinds in individual sectors. Business rates discourage start-ups and they discourage scale-ups. Obviously, rates disproportionately fall on property-heavy sectors. And with the development of e-commerce and delivery businesses, relatively speaking, that also then hurts further those with costlier premises in their cost base. And as a result of the accumulation of these factors, that the UK Hospitality and the British Retail Consortium estimate that hospitality and retail and leisure account for over a third of business rates, while accounting for under a tenth of the economy as a whole. And this matters to us as parliamentarians in particular, because of the role of these types of businesses in our town centres, our village centres, our city centres, and in our high streets, both in the direct effect that an individual shop or cafe or restaurant or pub has on footfall into the town, but also the indirect effect it has because of the interdependence of businesses one upon the other and the network effect. And although we quite often lump hospitality and retail together, actually the set of pressures affecting both, although there is some commonality between them, there are also differences. And in fact, hospitality has taken on more of the burden, if you like, of supporting our town centres over time relative to retail, because there are different levels of opportunity. In e-commerce, obviously, there is some. With retail business, there tends to be quite little, actually, with hospitality business, because by definition, if you're taking something from a vending machine, that is not hospitality. So I do support the concept of reforming business rates, actually a fundamental reform of business rates. The world has changed with the growth of e-commerce and, thankfully, with the growth in wages at the lower end of the wage distribution. We need to make a sharper distinction between shops and sheds, as in distribution sheds. But this bill doesn't do that, Madam Deputy Speaker. The distinction it makes in its reform is about large premises with large rateable values as against smaller premises. And although in the wording of this document explaining the policy, it's almost written as if on a quick read you would think the changes to distinguish online businesses from traditional retail, but it isn't. It talks about properties with rateable values over £500,000, which captures the majority of large distribution warehouses, including those used by online giants. Well, true, but it will also capture lots and lots of other businesses like department stores or hotels, which are clearly part of the retail and hospitality sectors. Conversely, some parts of the distribution network of online business will not be captured. One very large, well-known online retailer has already moved to a more distributed hub-and-spoke network with its regional fulfilment approach. I dare say that those one-hour delivery grocery people have even smaller individual premises. In the reform of business rates, I hope the Minister will consider that business rates can't do all the work. I did welcome very strongly the work of the last government with the digital services tax, which of course was always put forward as an interim measure pending wider reform of international taxation through the OECD. I don't believe a broader online sales tax is likely to be helpful. I think definitions would become rather difficult, and indeed the development of some of our small businesses that we really value in our town centres could be impeded. But I do welcome what they're talking about in terms of more frequent valuations. I do believe that any reform of business rates has to address the cliff edges that the Honourable Lady was talking about. And really it also has to deal with another problem that we as MPs worry about a great deal, and that is vacant premises. Right now, I'm most concerned about right now. The government promised that it would, and I quote, raise the same revenue but in a fairer way. That is not what is about to happen. Let us be very clear. The amount of money to be raised from business rates is about to go up, and it's about to go up on the back of retail and hospitality businesses. Now, they will say, in fact, he already did, they will say, oh, no, but we're extending a relief which was going to come to an end. There's even a line in this document which says, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, we are saving the average pub £3,300 a year. Well, they may say that, but that is not how it will feel to that pub. It is not how it will feel to the typical retail, leisure or hospitality business in any of our constituencies when they discover that the relief on their business on business rates is coming down. The relief is coming down from 75% to 40%, which in real terms for a business means for many of them that will be a doubling or more of the business rates they pay. And you cannot see it in isolation. It comes on top of a lot of other pressures. Now, the increase in the national living wage is a good thing. The national living wage has been a very successful policy which, since 2015, has reduced the number of people in work on low pay from 1 in 5 to less than 1 in 10. But the further increase in the national living wage, which I welcome, I'm afraid comes with things that I do not welcome. In particular, the great extra cost pressure on employer national insurance contributions. And there's been a lot of nonsense talked about whether or not that counts as a tax on working people. Everybody knows that in the end, employer taxes on labour only ever show through in lower employment figures or in wages lower than they otherwise would have been. And then on top of that, there is the French-style labour laws. Now, whereas employer national insurance contributions may result in lower employment in any individual institution, the effect of this business rates hike will be I'm afraid, some establishments closing altogether. Just before I sit down, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to say a word about schools, and there have been impassioned speeches from members across the floor about that. Most of what colleagues may talk about, I think, will probably come back on Wednesday in the second reading debate on the finance bill, and I can assure the right honourable gentleman opposite that we will be back too. Relatively speaking, the measures in this bill today are small compared to the VAT changes. So this bill is projected to raise £70 million eventually for the Treasury, another £70 million for local authorities. That's compared to £1.6 billion through the VAT hike. And then going with that is a relatively small effect from these measures on displacement into state schools. But there is still displacement into state schools, and let's be clear about that. That is a cost to the state, but more importantly, in individual places, that is going to be a strain on some of our local school systems, on class sizes, and ultimately on the prospects of parents getting the first choice for their child in the school they want to go to. And although colleagues on both sides have talked about the fact that this isn't just about rate, you can't see the rates thing alone, you have to put it together with VAT. Actually, there are four that are happening this year, which increase the amount of money going out of independent schools into the exchequer. Business rates is one of them. The VAT is a second. The third is employer national insurance contributions, which has a big effect on this sector. And the fourth is the 5 percentage point increase in employer contributions on the teacher pension scheme, which, because of the structure of the workforce, will mean for that measure on its own for most schools accounts for, I estimate, about 3.5% on total cost. And all of this matters because of the uneven effect there will be on displacement into state schools. And whether you are in Salford or in Surrey, in Bristol or in Bury, you may find that there are great strains put on the schools in your area that were not expected. There will also be, from this measure as well as the VAT measure, a disproportionate effect on low-cost faith schools, many of which rely partly on donations to keep going. They are not businesses who are in some way well endowed. They are doing something because they believe that to serve the needs of their faith, they cannot find that in the state sector. Some of these schools are charging less than the cost of the average state school place in our country, and it seems bizarre that this government would wish to hammer them. It will also create a two-tier charity system where some organisations charities can be disfavoured fiscally, even while complying with their charitable obligations and serving their communities. It is, I suggest, Madam Deputy Speaker, a new and most unwelcome example of state overreach, and I'll be voting against this bill this evening.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will base much of my contribution also on the latter part of this bill with reference to private schools. However, before I go into that, can I welcome the changes that the Minister is proposing through this legislation that will benefit massively our high streets. And the reality is the last 14 years have seen our high streets devastated by the previous government, and in particular I welcome the permanent lowering of business rates in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, which I think will be a huge boost to our high streets. Madam Deputy Speaker, it would also, whilst coming on to the schools part of this debate, it would be remiss of me not to start by mentioning the 14 years of brutal Tory cuts that have led us to this moment where state schools, frankly, are hanging on by a thread. Abandoned for 14 years by a government that brought zero investment to schooling, who simply watched the sector struggle through the COVID-19 pandemic, left school buildings laden with asbestos or crumbling concrete, who knew that teachers were paying out of their own pocket for school supplies and food for hungry students, and instead of supporting them, chose to attack public workers close to breaking point. Teachers have long paid the price, leaving the education system in droves. And can we blame them for what the treatment they have had over the last 14 years? In my constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, of Bradford East alone, 95% of schools have faced cuts to per pupil funding, 15.6 million since 2010. That's over £680 less per pupil. So it is refreshing to finally see a government share my values and my commitments not to leave state schools at breaking point, with a clear plan to deliver as much needed lifeline directly to them. By ending the eligibility for business rates, charitable rate relief and VAT relief, which I appreciate the Minister is right to know is in a separate legislation to come before this House, although I do think in this debate both are connected, so I will make mention to the VAT relief also that private schools currently enjoy. And frankly, the 1.5 billion that will be raised will go towards improving the education and life outcomes of all children by recruiting thousands more teachers and by funding much needed breakfast clubs for children. Many will welcome the government ending this discount on education that the richest schools and the richest parents currently get. Because what kind of society, what kind of government arranges concessions for the wealthiest while working class children go hungry as they learn? That's not a society. And some of the arguments we will hear and we have heard, it's not a society that champions freedom of choice. It's one where the wealth bracket of your parents, your postcode and your school determines the success of your life. And if we let this inequality entrench itself any longer, we will never be able to end it, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I fully understand and endorse the spirit of the decision to close the tax loophole on private schools. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I also note that there is a growing fear and concern in my constituency and other constituencies, particularly for those smaller, independent and faith schools who provide excellent and often specialised schooling for children that we should also recognise. And that's why I'm pleased that the government has confirmed that where private schools are charities that provide education for children with education, health and care plans, they will retain the charitable relief as they rightly should. My view is that the impact on smaller, independent and faith schools should be considered too. And I firmly believe that it is not in the spirit of this legislation to punish them. And I think we should draw a clear distinction. Because let us be clear, the average fees for some of the I will do.
Really grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's quite right to highlight the impact on small schools, often with pretty low fees. So is he going to vote against this legislation tonight? Because the spirit of this legislation is to hit everything in the private sector as if every institution was eaten, when he knows and we know that they're anything but.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman, and he's a brave soul, because he often tries to defend the indefensible. But I will say this to the honourable gentleman, and he and I have sparred often across these benches, but I will say this to him: the place he comes from and the place I come from are distinctly different. Because I support the spirit and ethos of this legislation, because I do not think it is right to give tax concessions and subsidies to those richest in society, whilst the poorest and our kids go hungry in school. So we come from different places, and if he lets me make my point where I'm coming from with regards to the genuinely smaller and faith schools, I think he may answer part of his question at least. Because when we talk about those schools, let us be clear, the average fees for some of these smaller schools are around £3,000, a great deal less than the average. They are maintained through community support and donations. They are not in the same league as the Eatons of this world. They don't reproduce class inequalities. In fact, they enable some of the most deprived communities to flourish. It would be a travesty if these schools were inadvertently punished by a decision designed to tackle the same inequality that some of them worked so hard to break down. If we don't consider the impact on them, Madam Deputy Speaker, these schools charging the lowest fees, often located in extremely deprived communities, will suffer. And working class parents who have saved up for many years often to get to these schools will sadly have to leave. And again, whilst I'm of course supportive of children moving from that sector into the state sector, the reality is 14 years of underfunding, underinvestment have left us with serious capacity issues in the state sector. Something, again, perhaps somebody from the opposite benches may want to address when they speak. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I also take this opportunity? To recognise the massive contributions that faith schools make to society? And I have a number of Muslim faith schools in my constituency who do some excellent work in my constituency, and I want to put my thanks on the record for all that they do. And I therefore must urge ministers to put in safeguards for smaller, independent and faith schools, many of whom sadly will not survive the policy in its current form. Now, this can be achieved because I believe the money that will be generated from the smallest of schools will not be to the level that will have the impact on the overall spirit of this legislation. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, you are staring at me in a very telling way, although there is no time limits. I know that look, Madam Deputy Speaker. To conclude, I agree wholeheartedly that we cannot keep funding tax breaks for the top end of society while neglecting the rest. And actually, it's something I have spoken on and championed my whole life. And I believe that this policy is the right one for our state schools. However, I must urge the government to reconsider and not let smaller, independent and faith schools, who are some of the lowest charging schools, pay the price. And I must urge ministers to listen to their concerns and put in safeguards as this and other relevant legislation progresses through to the next stages. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Anna.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I refer the House to the register of interest and the fact that I own a high street cafe. I'm proud that there are so many shops and independent shops in high streets in my constituency of Frome and East Somerset. Midsummer Norton in particular epitomises the traditional British high street with haberdashery, hardware and craft shops. On the other side of the constituency, you only need to take a stroll through Frome to stumble across independent cafes, bookshops and tailors. We know that high streets are the centre of local economies and a place for community cohesion. They are idiosyncratic to the needs of the communities they serve and offer local jobs and training opportunities. They also provide social goods. For example, Denude is a zero-waste shop in Frome that helps support the local community to live more sustainably. Yet for the last 9 years, small businesses and local high streets have felt the burden of economic instability and other pressures. The shops and businesses that still exist have fought hard to protect themselves and have in many ways defied the odds. They've had to adapt to changing consumer trends, compete with the rise of online retail giants, navigate COVID-19 and survive the mini-budget and the subsequent impact on mortgage rates and disposable income, which is still being felt. Now, still feeling the impact of all of this, some businesses will, in the short term, have to pay both higher business rates and national insurance contributions. While small businesses have proven they are excellent at adapting, I really do feel the impact some of these changes may have on our local high streets and independent shops. Businesses I've spoken to over the last few months often use the phrase that they're only one bad month away from closure. While permanently lowering business rates for retail, hospitality and leisure is a step in the right direction, it's still not enough to help our flourishing high streets thrive again, and we know many important small businesses fall outside these categories. The Lib Dems want to see a complete overhaul of the business rate system, instead of targeting small businesses that are the backbone of our high streets and local communities. We want to replace business rates with a new, fairer levy on commercial property owners instead of their tenants. Small businesses can adapt, but not endlessly, and I fear that at the moment too much is being thrown at them with insufficient support.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the general election, businesses in my community were crying out for change. The need for stability and certainty after more than a decade of chaos and incompetence had hit them all hard. And one of the things they welcomed was Labour's pledge to reform business rates and ensure the online giants who suck so much out of our local economies would pay their fair share. Small town high streets like those in Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate desperately need the support a change in business rates will give them. It is vital we create a fairer business rates regime to support investment and protect our high streets. And more widely, I heard a real anxiety on the doorstep about the need for more teachers in our schools and access to quality education so often unavailable for the 94% of children who go to state schools. Reforming business rates for private schools, which only serve 6% of the population, makes sense. It's carefully costed and will make a difference to so many children in Thanet and across our country. I hope in particular it is a driver to increase access to the creative disciplines so that children can learn to expand, develop and harness their imagination, appreciate the arts in all their forms with good quality creative education delivered by qualified teachers who love their subject. Now it should go without saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it does need to be said that children raised with good quality creative education have the potential to go on to contribute to our local economy through the creative industries, including starting their own businesses. So when it comes to business rates, our system has disincentivised investment and created huge burdens on our high street. The party opposite created a cliff edge for high street businesses across the country as temporary reliefs were due to end. Providing certainty through a 40% relief rate and the freezing of the small business tax multiplier is very welcome. I welcome the Chancellor's intention to permanently lower rates for retail, hospitality and leisure. This is crucial for constituencies like mine in East Thanet, where creative industries and tourism businesses are crying out for help. I have been working with the Ramsgate Empty Shop campaign to revive our high street in that town. Now, despite its wonderful heritage, thriving creative community and extraordinary environmental assets, Ramsgate's local economy is far too seasonal, and that makes running a business all year round harder. That in turn has driven many businesses to the brink and left the high street echoing with the silence of empty shops. Spaces which should be seen as an opportunity for entrepreneurs have become a sign of desolation. That must change. The importance of business rate changes is also highlighted in the other aspect of the bill, the removal of private schools' rates relief. Now, every parent wants the best for their children. That is not something exclusive to those who choose to send their children to private school.
Absolutely right.
There is nothing wrong with ambition. If we are to enable all families to fulfil their ambitions, we must make sure they all have access to the very best quality education. It is our duty as a society and a country to make sure all of those children's talents, aptitudes and interests are nurtured. Vast swathes of working-class children, Madam Deputy Speaker, do not have access to that kind of education that would be genuinely transformative. For example, the last government cut back radically the amount of arts education in state schools, locking working-class children out of the opportunities to find their talent, tap into their imagination, learn how to play an instrument, express themselves through dance, wield a paintbrush, work with clay, look deeply and critically at the world around them and respond to it. They pursued a curriculum that damaged the prospects of those children.
That's right.
In contrast, private schools know that creative education is good for children's well-being and academic outcomes. This is why they put so many resources into developing it. That is why they allocate the resources, build the assets and invest in the teaching staff to ensure their children get that access to the creative arts that contribute to society in every dimension. Now, unsurprisingly, 40% of those working in film, TV and music industries were educated at private schools. Who knows of the amount of untapped talent? In the 94% of children in state schools, we have lost as a country because of the actions of the last government. It is estimated that the creative sector in the UK is worth £125 billion and employs 2.3 million people. We are limiting ourselves as a country by not giving every child in the country access to creative education. Can you imagine how much more we could be producing in economic prosperity as well as greater well-being if those children had the same access as the 6% had? So yes, it is right to find that money from the private schools who serve the 6%. Yes, it is right that we find the money for more and better teachers in state schools with a love of the arts, with an enthusiasm for sharing their appreciation and skills, or with an aptitude for spotting talent, rewarding effort and encouraging creativity. Those small businesses in my community also want to know the children in our schools become young adults as fully rounded products of our education system, with their imagination, skills and discipline developed ready for the kind of work in the creative industries that drives our economy, locally, nationally and globally. If for nothing else, I urge the House to vote for these changes, for our children, for our small businesses and our economy.
Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Liberal Democrats, we would very much like to see a much more fundamental reform of business rates. While there are promises of further steps, it's disappointing that our new government, with such a large majority, is not being more ambitious now. Our high streets will remain in deep trouble. The retail, hospitality and leisure sector will now only have 40% relief instead of 75%. But sectors such as manufacturing, which is having such a difficult time adjusting to a post-Brexit world, will get zero relief. Now we've got greatly increased national insurance contributions, with taxes having to be paid before a business even makes a profit. On top of that, we all know that our high streets, such as Witney's beautiful high street, as seen in the Times newspaper today, is being eaten alive by online retail. We need to do much more to level the playing field between online and offline retail, and I feel that this adjustment is a very, very blunt instrument for doing that, and we need to be much more precise about going after big tech and taxing them appropriately. There are a few steps that we would really like to see brought in, and a commercial landover levy, which taxes just the land value of commercial sites, not productive investment. And this has worked very effectively in Australia, in Denmark and in Estonia. A land value tax which is much more effective at capturing the publicly created uplifts in land value, rather than leaving it to landowners to pocket these sometimes enormous gains. This is largely how our Victorian forebears built our railway network and how countries around the world, ranging from Japan and Korea to much of Northern Europe, fund new transport links. And that's something that we want to do between Oxford and Witney. Scrapping stamp duties on commercial land, making our market in land simpler and more efficient. Switching the tax to the owner rather than the tenant. This would spare 500,000 small and medium enterprises the admin burden of property taxation and would save money and time in collecting the tax. Ending the exemptions on empty and derelict premises, incentivising action rather than inaction. So we very much hope the new government will follow through on its promises to take further substantial steps. After all, you have the votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the weekend, I watched my second favourite film. And at the end of the film, the main character in my opinion, utters the immortal lines, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." And when I considered the ending of tax exemption and charitable status on private schools, I often considered this line. We want all children to have the best chance in life to succeed. And 94% of children in the UK attend state schools, and like every child, they deserve the highest quality of support and teaching. I also believe that ending the tax break on private schools will help raise the revenue needed to fund our education priorities for next year. But then I realised, actually, the phrase, "the needs of the many," don't quite cover it. When the party opposite talk about choice, but the way I see it, there are only really two reasons why parents would choose to pay tens of thousands of pounds each year to send their children to private school rather than state school. Maybe three if you go to Eton. Longer opening times and boarding facilities, or a lack of faith in local state provision. We do want to take away the choice of going to private schools, but not in the way the party opposite keep parroting. We want to make state schools so good that no one feels the need to send their children to private school. There should be no necessity for private schools. I think everyone in the chamber, even across the side there, would acknowledge the issues of SEND funding in schools and that it has been underfunded. I was lucky enough to visit a school in my constituency, Newhall Primary School, on Friday. And I saw the work they were doing to support SEND students in their school, even though it's not a specialist SEND school. However, they were only able to do that with a small number of students. Imagine what they could do with additional funding opportunities. They could help so many more. What many fail to recognise is that these private schools do have the choice to absorb some of this tax. We are not here to punish students or parents. The schools can choose to absorb some of this tax in the same way that the state sector has been asked to do so for the past 14 years. I will give way.
Honourable gentleman, I wonder whether he listened to the speech by his honourable friend. There are many private schools that actually charge less than the funding that goes to state schools. Every school is not Eton. What has he got to say about the most vulnerable schools, the children therein, and isn't any policy grounded on looking at the most vulnerable rather than the strongest when it comes to designing it properly?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. It's very exciting, my first intervention for a member of the opposition. I think that he's failing to recognise the point I'm trying to make in my speech, which actually is talking about the fact that we need to support the state sector to actually be as good as it possibly can be. So actually parents don't feel the need to send their students to private schools. The party opposite groaned when we mentioned the £22 billion black hole. But I don't even need to mention the £22 billion black hole. In fact, I'm not going to mention the £22 billion black hole once more. But what I will mention, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we have high streets which are already boarded up and school buildings that are left crumbling. I visit state schools in my constituency all the time and see children of all ages and all abilities, full of compassion, full of intelligence and full of potential. I had a fantastic opportunity to visit St Mark's Catholic School in my constituency again last Friday, and the questions that the students were asking were fantastic. And if they're listening now, I would emphasise that they can aspire to achieve everything they want to achieve in their life. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, classrooms are overfilled, classrooms are underfunded, and paint is peeling off from the walls, and they have, not this particular school, but schools have heating which is faulty. Despite all these things, these students cannot be filled with more excitement and more desire to learn and to understand. Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour, I see you're looking at me, I'll bring it on. Labour is making the fair choice to support small business and give every child the chance to succeed and to protect public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll finish with a line from my favourite film of all time, A Matter of Life and Death, David Niven, in which he says in the opening remarks of the film, politics, Conservative by nature, Labour by experience. And I am delighted on the 4th of July, plenty of people went to the polls with that view. Thank you.
Without curiously explaining without curiously explaining the movie he opened up his speech with. Sarah Bool.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Cardiff School in my constituency is a small private school. It's not an Eton or it's not a Harrow, but it has already announced that it may be forced to close mid-academic year because of the budget and this bill. And I met with the head teacher the other day, who is a really passionate leader, and she's absolutely devastated by this. And she mentioned many of the points that the member for East Hampshire has mentioned before in the 4 main areas. But as she explained, 80% of their costs are staff salaries, so the increase in employers' national insurance contributions are crippling. The changes to business property relief are also challenging, and imposing VAT on the school fees means that the uplift in the fees is unsustainable for many parents. They simply cannot absorb this tax, and they face little choice after these consistent hits but to potentially close. Now that means that 110 children, including those with EHCPs, will now have to plan to be rehomed into different schools with all the disruption that this causes. The burden also falls to our local councils, who have to have the responsibility now to find different state places, and for those children who would actually take those with EHCPs, at a point when the council budgets are already stretched. So our state schools are also at capacity, and this puts more harm for many children. Now, the member for East Thanet mentioned the importance of creative opportunities, and I entirely agree that the arts are absolutely vital. But this budget also hits opportunities for access to the creative arts. NPAT, the Northamptonshire Music and Performing Arts Trust, is a charitable organisation which offers children of all backgrounds access to lessons. But with these measures, again, on increase on the employer's national insurance and the business property release, makes it so much harder to offer these lessons, and they are genuinely struggling, and it would be such a devastation to lose such opportunity for our next generation. So just remember, regardless of politics on this side, it is our children's education which is being penalised by these measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to speak today specifically on the removal of charitable tax status from private schools. We know that the total number of school children in private schools is 6%. This means 94% of children are not. Do those 6% still matter? Of course they do, as I believe that every child should have access to a high-quality education. I say this from spending years working frontline in state education under the previous Labour government, where the framework for all children's services was, in fact, Every Child Matters. And forgive me if I feel a little angry about some of the chuntering that is going on, because I also worked frontline education when the coalition government came in, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats working together, and in the first 18 months, what did they cut? Education maintenance allowance that supported some of the most vulnerable, disadvantaged children I was working with to go to sixth form. Disadvantaged Subsidy Pathfinder project, cut. A National Careers Service, cut. School sports partnerships, cut. Youth services, cut. Sure Start services, cut. Sure Start maternity grants, cut, all within the first 18 months. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is because of that the rot set in our education system, and the very reason that I am standing here today. At the school gates in the morning, a bit of a reality here when dropping off my son, I stand side by side with parents, juggling jobs and home life, who have ambitions for their child that knows no boundaries. Every parent I have ever worked with wants better for their child, and whether you are financially able to send them to private school does not change this. Yet there is a huge disparity between the choice at the moment. State schools are struggling. The Department for Education figures released in January of this year show that last year 13% of local authority maintained schools were in deficit. That's 4% higher than the year before in 21-22, with reports that 19 of these schools are in fact in Nottinghamshire. In my constituency of Sherwood Forest, the School Cuts campaign estimates that 69% of schools have faced cuts to pupil funding since 2010. This is having a huge impact on the lives of children in my constituency. Their health, their well-being, their mental health. In one area of my constituency, it has the highest rate of male suicide in the whole of the country. I regularly meet with schools in my constituency, and I see how hard the staff work to ensure the children still get a quality education despite the challenges they face. One of the main challenges is, of course, funding. But I want to illustrate what that means in day-to-day life. Leans Mills Primary School, a fantastic school, serving its community and some of the most disadvantaged children that lives in my community. It is unable to afford acceptable buildings and classrooms for their children to learn in, ones that facilitate learning and are comfortable for pupils and staff. Pupils have to walk outside between buildings to use the toilets in all weathers, come rain or shine. Temporary buildings. This should not be the case. Yet it is so hard for the school to get the more basic requirement without the schools having to put up a fight. The changes to private schools' charitable tax status will generate additional funding so that we can help to improve our public services for all children and young people. More funding for schools such as Lean Mills Primary School would mean that all pupils, no matter where they live or how much their parents have the right to access a safe and comfortable learning environment. It's also about making sure we have enough in teachers, in particular ones who know and understand SEN provision. We know, I know, and I've seen it before, that if we better invest in our public mainstream schools, it will drastically impact pupils with SEN and those from our most disadvantaged backgrounds. It shouldn't ever be that a parent's only option is an independent private school. This is an indictment of the previous government, where the rot set in with the coalition government, a failed education system that continues to fail children. The truth is, education in the state sector has been neglected. How do I know? Because I see it as a parent. There's a 20% difference today of pupils getting GCSEs between those that have got have access to free school meals, which is an indicator of poverty, and those that do not. 20%. That is not an education system that is achieving as it should be. I see this every day as a parent, as a governor, and as a professional that knows that when you get it right, education changes lives. It transforms whole communities. And it will be this government that once again transforms education. So every child matters once again, including every child in my constituency. Because education should be a right, Madam Deputy Speaker, not a privilege. Thank you.
Vikki Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since becoming a Member of Parliament earlier this year, I've been heartened every time I hear ministers confirm that business rate reform is planned. I know what impact business rates can have on town centres through my work as a council leader and my own time owning and operating high street business for nearly 14 years within my constituency of Mid Dorset and North Pool. Not anymore, so I don't need to declare it as an interest. This is why I was so disappointed to read this bill, which simply tinkers around the edges and does nothing to fix the foundations of our town centres or do anything about the inequity of business rates between physical and online businesses. I welcome the higher rate aimed at large warehouses, but it doesn't go far enough. These online businesses have sucked the life out of our high streets, and if what's proposed in this bill is the extent of the change, it isn't going to support anyone. Yes, of course.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. On that point around online businesses, it's not just the favourable business rates that benefit these businesses, it's the tax loopholes that they can use to prevent paying the taxes that small businesses pay as a proportion of their profits. Would she agree with me that the government has other mechanisms for raising such funding?
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you, and thank you for that intervention. I was just about to say we need a proper tech tax on online businesses, and it should be ring-fenced to stay in local communities where councils can use it to support town centres in the way that works for them. Many councils are not able to keep the business rates that are accrued in their areas. They are set externally, they are sent elsewhere to support other communities. And this is something that is not understood or even appreciated by local communities. I cannot remember the number of times as a local government leader I was shouted at by people saying, "You're making all that money as a council." People think that the councils own the businesses, that they own the properties and that they set the rates. The fact that it is set elsewhere and that the councils then do not have the power to discount those without having to plug the gap, not just for their own area, but in what they send to government. That's what real reform looks like. Yes, of course.
Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful for her giving way, and I think she's making some wide-ranging points. I would like to say that I think the government's policy in this area is excellent, but also just to remind her that there are a range of other policies which local government themselves can implement, and I'd like to commend my own local council in Reading, where there's been a lot of work in the town centre to try and keep local small businesses active in the town centre. Planning, a range of other things, working with the business community is also really important. I just wondered if she wanted to comment on that.
Absolutely. I mean, we were looking to work with the rental auctions that are coming in, and I'm encouraged to hear when I was leading for as the Lib Dem spokesperson in a Westminster Hall debate a few weeks ago that is coming through, and I hope that it comes through quickly and that actually it doesn't have the loopholes that I feared that it was going to have. But if I could just move on to my concerns about this policy, in that we need to make sure that those who profit from businesses pay. Business rates, as described in this bill, are related not just to the rateable value, but it's explicitly linked to the rental value. It bears no relationship to the type of business, its profitability, or its broader benefits to the community or to society. And I'd like to give you an example. And I know it's accurate because it's the figures from my own business that I used to own. It does predate the retail, hospitality and leisure discount, but given that that's not guaranteed to be continued in any way, I think the numbers will startle you. We owned a cafe on a high street in an affluent community with an older population, with competition from several sources including a Costa franchise and a church cafe, which of course pays no rates. The rent on our cafe was £25,000 a year, and our rates bill was £19,000. This meant I was not eligible for a penny of small business rate relief, so my rent and rates bill was around £4,200 a month. In a ward less than 3 miles away, Madam Deputy Speaker, a cafe on their high street was being marketed with a rental of just £12,500 and a rateable value of £11,000. Thanks to small business rate relief, and I'm sure you will say that's a great thing, and it absolutely is, they paid no rates, so their fixed outgoings was £1,900.
Now, I'm sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that you don't think we could charge 2.5 times more for a tuna mayo sandwich and a cup of coffee than the other cafe down the road. And that's the problem with the way business rate works. Yeah. This inequity and the pressure it put on my business and all those I represented when I was chair of the Broadstone Chamber of Trade and Commerce is what got me into politics, as sad as that is. But that's why I got involved, and that's why I stand here today to say to you that the Lib Dems want you to go further. We want business rates replaced with a proper landowner levy so that it's not the tenants who are paying, but those who really benefit from the property, which is the people who own it. So this may be a reasonable start, but it doesn't go far enough, and I would love you to see you go further. Thank you.
Before I call the next speaker, I know the Honourable Lady won't have intended to do that, but she used you repeatedly when it was very unclear whether she was addressing me. I suspect the last one was to the Minister. Joe White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Charitable tax release is meant to be for organisations that do something for the good of society. They get tax breaks because they're supposed to benefit the public, especially those who need it most. But when we look at private schools, we start to see a problem. These schools aren't serving the wider public. They charge eye-watering fees, and the vast majority of people simply can't afford to send their kids there. Here's the real issue. Private schools are benefiting from a process that should be supporting the whole of society. They get tax breaks worth millions of pounds every year. And what do we get in return? An education system that reinforces and upholds structural inequalities. Meanwhile, state schools, the ones that serve the vast majority of kids, have been left to scrape by, struggling with overcrowded classrooms, outdated resources and ever-decreasing funding. This bill is redistributive, and it means that the monies going into private schools will be far better spent improving the chances of all children. I want fairness, my constituents want fairness, and an equal chance for all our children. Now, I know what those on the opposite benches are saying, but private schools give scholarships, they do charity work, they help kids in need. But let's be honest, it's a drop in the ocean to where we should be. And here's the kicker. Private schools aren't even charities in the true sense of the word. They might not make a profit, but many of them are run by private companies making money off investments and land. We all know that the largest private schools in the country have no shortage of cash, and yet they're still getting subsidies that could be used to fix the mess left by the previous government in our state schools. They don't provide a benefit for the public good, they just prop up inequality and drain resources from the schools that serve the vast majority of children. I welcome that we are taking a good, hard look at the way education works, and we are putting our money where it does the most good, raising aspirations and opportunities for all our children, no matter their background, and that has to be our focus.
Gideon Amos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was going to say that when the honourable gentleman, the member on the Conservative opposition benches, who's no longer in his seat, was describing the Conservative government's approach of supporting business, I was going to say I was listening with interest, but I think incredulity would be a better word. And my honourable friend, the member for Witney, who's no longer in his seat, was rather harsh on the Conservatives. He said they never followed their commitments on business, and they didn't have a clear policy on business. Conservatives had a very, very clear and pithily described policy on business. It began with F, had K in the middle, and ended with the word business. And they delivered on that policy, believe me. And with their post-Brexit trade deal, and in case that message hadn't been rammed home hard enough, they confirmed it with a budget that played helter-skelter chaos with the economy. So I do sympathise with the new government's approach in terms of the budget they're trying to set, in terms of establishing stability, and it's something that I would want to support. But I'm disappointed that I won't be able to vote for this bill because of the effect it's going to have For example, on towns like Wellington and Taunton in my constituency, where there's a triple whammy is going to hit those towns. Those towns support some great independent schools, which are charities, Taunton School, Wellington School, Kings and Queens. They sustain around 1,000 jobs in the constituency, many of which are now at threat, and many workers at those schools, cleaners, catering staff, are worried what's going to happen. But as well as that, of course, there are the effects of national insurance contributions on small businesses. And that is a very serious effect on small businesses. I have one in the high street of Taunton, particularly many small businesses whose rateable value is over 51,000. That is quite typical of a high street in this country. Small and medium-sized businesses at the smaller end, I would suggest. And the owner of Mr. Miles' Tea Room, a superb place to go to in my constituency, has written to me to say the effects on his business of these combined effects of the budget on a small business are first, as he says, firstly, all my staff will now see a reduction in the hours they will be scheduled. As a result, no doubt some will leave. Where many of my employees already earn over the current minimum wage, I will not be able to increase their pay rates by as much as I have done in the past. Secondly, any full-time employees who leave our employment will only be replaced by 2 or 3 part-time employees. Thirdly, I will not be investing in any capital equipment in my kitchen anymore or any new decor in my restaurant. And fourthly, there is a serious potential for me to operate on shortened trading hours, thus reducing the vibrancy of the town centre. And he goes on, I was cautiously optimistic that a new Labour government couldn't possibly be worse than the previous Tory one in terms of lack of support for SMEs. Sadly, in the space of 3 short months, this government has already proved my optimism was misplaced, and there will be many casualties over the next 12 months as the measures take effect. So I urge the Minister to reconsider both the effect on independent schools, and I'm a great supporter of the state school system.
Member give way on that point. Thank you. There's an independent school in my constituency, Kingswood House School, and they've got around 50% of pupils who have SEN, but many of those pupils don't have an EHC plan. Does the honourable member agree with me that schools providing support to so many children like this should retain their charitable rate relief?
I absolutely do agree with my honourable friend, and I'm also concerned about the influx of children going to local authorities to apply for EHCPs, because they will now need them to get the discount, and the massive effect that's going to have on already overstretched local authorities and how they're going to cope with those applications over and above the SEN crisis at the moment, I worry. I'm a great supporter of state schools. I'm a great supporter of state schools partly because of the record of the Liberal Democrats, who not only ring-fence the education budget in the first years of the coalition, but also injected £1.25 billion by inventing the pupil premium, which now injects £3 billion. The Honourable Lady shakes her head, but these are the facts of the... Yes, I'll give way.
The pupil premium funding was actually disadvantaged subsidy pathfinder funding, which was the previous Labour government's funding. You just changed the name.
The pupil premium was new money, and it went into the state school sector, 1.25 billion in the first year, up to 3 billion worth now in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, delivered as part of our priority for state schools. And I don't just believe in state schools because of party policy. All my 4 children attended some fantastic state schools in my constituency, Parkfield School, Bishop Fox's School, and the fantastic Richard Hewish College in my constituency. And the very idea, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the only way to improve state schools is to level down independent schools, I'm sorry, shows a shocking lack of imagination and a really disappointing approach to education, and education should not be taxed. The Minister earlier quite rightly said that those of us who are arguing for a different approach should be willing to make clear where we would raise the money, and he's absolutely right to make that point. And the Liberal Democrats have made that point, and they have made tough decisions in the past, and in our manifesto we had a very clear budget spending plan of reinstalling the tax on the banks, on the big bank profits, which was slashed and taken away in 2018. Simply restoring that single tax would raise £4.2 billion for the economy. I'm urging the Minister to adopt the principle that if the broadest shoulders should bear the biggest burden, and that should surely apply also in the business sector as much as anywhere else. So the big companies, the big banks, the giant online retailers, they should be bearing the burden of this budget, not the small high street firms like Mr Miles in Taunton High Street and the other businesses we've heard about. And I urge the Minister to think further on this.
Peter Lamb.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. National non-domestic rate multipliers. Is there any more interesting topic for almost 9 o'clock on a Monday night? Absolutely not. Quite right. And I'm sure the regular readers of my blog would say much the same. Our system of taxation of local government in this country is the product of evolution and not of design. It has its roots in Elizabethan forms of taxation, which have been inherited and adapted through the passage of time to adapt to modern realities. And what we're talking about here today is yet again adapting to those modern realities. Like many members of this House, I am a former local government leader myself. I might very well have been one of the ones who was bending the ear of my honourable friend, the member for Ealing North, in asking for this change to come forward, because it is certainly well overdue. We've heard town centres described as being the heart of the community. What do we actually mean by that? Without a clear public space where the whole of a society interacts, towns lack identity, towns lack common sense of bonds between themselves, towns tend to come apart and you see social degradation. And council leaders such as myself have spent the last 14 years trying to adapt to the new realities of our economy, spending a fortune in public money, investing countless hours and countless officer hours in trying to reinvigorate our town centres to ensure that they live on for the next generation, not simply because it's what we think is best, but because overwhelmingly that is the response our communities say that they want for their areas. They want their town centres to be vibrant again and to be a fundamental part of their community. The problem is, no matter what we do on the ground, no matter how much effort we put in, we simply cannot overcome the huge cost disparity between online retailing and physical retailing in the high street. And you would expect, where these challenges exist, that the state would use the levers at its disposal to encourage those things which we think are socially beneficial to be given that extra boost compared to those things which we think come at the detriment of society. And what we're talking about here today is doing exactly that. It's ensuring that those parts of our community that the residents of our constituencies want, that we think are fundamental to their identity, are able to survive into the coming decades, while ensuring that those areas which are now the most profitable, because, surprise, surprise, those things which in Elizabethan times were the most profitable businesses, i.e. buildings immediately adjacent to the local church, no longer have the same level of profit margin that they once did, are given that break in comparison. We've heard an awful lot from the opposition benches about things that parties of government over the last 14 years could have, would have, should have done, given the opportunity. But over those 14 years, I'm afraid to say they didn't. And as a council leader through that period, I was regularly making the case, and we were promised changes at various times, and they never happened. The one thing which we did end up with was full business rate retention, which in my local authority, which we collect £120 million worth of business rates each year, we get to keep £4 million of that, which rather, I think, puts pay to the idea that words have any real meaning sometimes when they're used in reference to some of these policies. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the single biggest change that can be introduced to ensure that our high street survives in the future. And I'm very proud that whatever idealised form members opposite may wish to imagine could exist, that the real policy being delivered here today is one that actually enables us to support those businesses that our communities desperately want and ensure that those businesses which can afford to carry a bigger load do. Thank you.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I stand here in support of the majority of the amendment from the Liberal Democrats. The reduction in high street business rate relief from 75% today to 40% will devastate the small businesses on my high streets in Backley and in Dewsbury, and they will not, many of them will not be able to absorb those costs, resulting in job losses and closures. But the primary topic I want to talk about today is again the implications of this bill on private schools. Private schools that don't draw their students from the families of the richest in our society. Now, in previous debates, when I spoke out against this, when it came to VAT, I was accused of not wanting the best for the 94% of the students in our country. I absolutely love state schools. I visited my primary school last week during UK Parliamentary Week in Boothroyd Primary, and the children were so excited to meet me, but I think I was more excited to meet them and meet the teachers. I also visited a faith school, a private faith school, which charges, I believe, less than £3,000 per pupil, and spoke to the pupils there. So there are private schools that are serving working class poor families, and there is a reason these families have chosen to send their children to these schools, and it would be really a penalty to remove that choice from these parents. The other challenge that I have in my constituency is that the schools are bursting at the seams, with very few, if any, places available to parents, and many parents and many children are going to second or third choice schools away from their catchment area. So, coming back to private schools and the removal of charitable status, an extra burden on top of the 20% VAT. So these students overwhelmingly come from low-income families. This reality often gets lost in the debate about private schools. We are all very aware of their elitist nature, with an average fee of over £15,000 rising up to £50,000. They service only the children of the wealthiest. It is not, however, the children of the wealthy who attend independent schools in constituencies like mine in Dewsbury and Batley, where faith schools are often the only option for families who can't get their children into local state school due to demand, or where state schools cannot meet their religious and spiritual needs. These families are overwhelmingly from low-income backgrounds, and the removal of business rates relief on charitable private schools will result in a further increase of their fees in addition to the VAT that is also proposed. For wealthy families, this might not be a problem. For the families in my constituency, it is a major problem. In addition, the measures will pose a risk to the future viability of many of these schools, who often charge just enough to exist. So I would ask the government to consider that class is a reality in the discussion about private schools, but not in the way it is commonly presented. In many communities, faith-based schools are not the preserve of the wealthy. They are a place overwhelmingly educating the children of ordinary working-class families. The government's impact assessment of the proposals show the average cost per school of the removal of charitable status ranges from £27,000 a year to £179,000 a year for faith schools. This issue is more complicated than measures to raise tax, and it feels to me that some important subtleties have been lost in the debate. For many of my constituents, faith schools not only provide high-quality education, they also provide children of faith with the relative freedom of expressing their faith and identity without fear of stigma or recrimination. I feel none of this reality was properly considered when we discussed VAT on private schools, and now when abolishing business rate relief for charity private schools, that imbalance continues. The government has an opportunity now to redress that imbalance, and I would request consideration is given to extending the exclusions given to special needs schools to include faith-based schools who draw their students from low-income backgrounds from the bill. One easy solution would be to exempt schools who charge below per pupil state school allowance exemption from VAT and to retain their charitable status. Thank you.
Steve Yem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I visited Jacqueline, a franchise owner who, through absolute sheer hard work and after working her way up through the ranks, now runs a number of restaurant outlets in and around Mansfield. And I witnessed firsthand her dedication to her business through the manner in which she motivates her staff as a business leader. And it's essential to outline that for leisure and hospitality businesses like those of Jacqueline's, trading is tough, and this has been made harder by the circumstances they are trading within, namely the uncertainty surrounding business rates that we've seen under the previous government. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, locally I stood on a platform to focus on 5 specific issues across Mansfield and Warsop, one of those being to help improve our town centre, and many in my local town centre are represented by the Mansfield Business Improvement District, and when I meet up with them, as I often do, and sometimes together with the Shopkeepers campaign, business rates come up time and time again. It's clear that we need a fairer system that doesn't put an unreasonable burden on the small businesses that power our high streets. That's why I welcome the reforms to business rates that have been made through the non-domestic rates bill today. This bill will bring about certainty and fairness to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses that have been disproportionately disadvantaged by the current system. I am further pleased to see this bill creates those powers needed to ensure that we can make good on our promise to introduce permanently lower rates for those retail, hospitality and leisure properties which make up the backbone of our high streets, included in my constituency of Mansfield, and to pay for this with a higher multiplier for the most valuable properties. Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as speaking with local businesses every week, I also visit schools across my constituency, and last week I visited a primary school that hasn't turned on the heating in the main part of their building for over 18 months, and were reliant upon the kind benevolence of local businesses to provide an essential business and breakfast club. It simply shouldn't have to be that way, that schools rely on local businesses, and it will not be this way, I'm sure, under this Labour government. In my Mansfield constituency, more than 1 in 4 pupils are eligible for and claiming free school meals, and the schools they are taught in are crying out for additional resources to help those young people. We cannot afford to offer tax breaks to private schools operating as businesses when our children's state education system, relied upon by over 95% of children in my constituency, is crumbling. That's why I'll be voting to support this bill, which will end those tax breaks on private schools and will help to raise the revenue needed to fund this government's education priorities.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are several issues with this bill, a glaring failure being its lack of immediate support for small and medium-sized businesses that exist outside of the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, and that there are still so many important to our national economy and to our local high streets. The government claims it would like to have a level playing field between the high street and online giants, but this bill fails to properly address the issue. Many small businesses fall outside of the retail, hospitality and leisure sector and will therefore see no benefit from this bill. These small businesses need their tax burden to be reduced as well. Labour's plan to increase national insurance contributions and increasing business rates will prove to be too much for many small businesses, including charities in my constituency, who are telling me that the increase in national insurance charges is going to seriously affect them and reduce the amount of money that they are going to be able to spend supporting the residents of Wokingham. Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Wokingham, small businesses have seen a huge increase in rent and in costs and have had to do their best to survive under a Conservative government that trashed the economy. As a result of Conservative policies over the last few years, a household with a mortgage now has at least £6,000 a year less to spend in our local high streets where our friends and our neighbours work. What these small businesses need now is a proper overhaul and reform of the business rate system, not just a bill that meddles around the edges to provide ineffective and short-term solutions, and they don't need an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. My constituency has a total of approximately 3,585 businesses that are outside of the retail, hospitality and leisure industry. That's roughly 70% of the businesses in the Wokingham constituency. This makeup of businesses is not too dissimilar to the national picture either, so the bill would be ineffective for businesses across the UK. The bill fails to offer support to the vast majority of business that desperately need tax burdens reduced. It is clear this bill does not do enough because so many businesses and charities which are so important to our high street are going to be left to absorb all this extra taxation that has been levied on them by the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill will not fix the broken system of business rates and will seriously damage the retail and small business sector in our economy.
Mark Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to be speaking on this bill which introduces the powers required to reform business rates. The government is committed to a fairer business rate system that protects the high street and supports investment, and I welcome that in the budget the Chancellor set out her intention to permanently lower rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties. They make up the backbone of our high street, including Queen Street in Morley, in my constituency. And of course this will be paid for with a higher multiplier for the most valuable properties. Today, however, I'd like to focus on another aspect of the bill. As a teacher, I'm going to talk about the provision in the bill that removes the charitable relief on business rates for many, but not all, private schools. This, of course, runs alongside our general election commitment to introduce VAT on private school fees, which we will be discussing in the Finance Bill second reading on Wednesday. Both measures, of course, though, will increase funding for state schools. Now, during that election campaign in July, and in the years up to it, I spoke with many parents in my constituency about the removal of tax breaks for private schools. Whatever their stance on the policy was, it was clear to me that every single parent I spoke to wanted the best for their children. It didn't matter whether they considered themselves wealthy or not. It didn't matter if they earned enough to send their children to private school or not. It didn't matter whether they lived in New Farnley or Thorpe. It really didn't matter because every single one of them wanted the best education for their children. And like I suspect almost every member of this House, I want an amazing education for every child, irrespective of where they come from or who they are. And that's exactly what this government and we are committed to delivering, using the revenue that this bill and the Finance Bill on Wednesday will raise. We live in a country where 94% of all children attend state schools. I fully accept that the 6% of children who go to private schools, their parents have worked very hard to put them there. But you know who else works hard? The parents of kids who go to state schools. They work just as hard in their jobs and professions, and yet some may never be in the financial position to send their children to private schools. Those children deserve the best too. And so it falls on this government to take the decisions necessary to improve our state schools. State schools have been plagued by so many crises under the previous government. The SEN crisis, the concrete crisis, the recruitment and retention crisis, I saw it myself. In my previous job as head of maths at an inner city school, I could put out a job advert and I'd be lucky if I got one applicant per position. And that's not just because of me. This must change, and we must raise the money to change it. Taken together with our commitment to introduce VAT on private school fees, which I accept we're not debating today, the extra net revenue raised from this will be essential to recruit the 6,500 new teachers that we promised the electorate at the general election we would recruit.
Yeah.
Every child deserves to be taught by a qualified teacher in every single subject.
Yeah.
Now, alongside our commitments to roll out free breakfast clubs, to invest in SEN provision, to rebuild the school estate, and increase per-pupil funding in real terms, we are choosing to back our children, back our schools, and back our country.
Yeah.
And given the crisis in SEND, I do also welcome that those in private schools mainly concerned with the provision of education to children with EHCPs, that's Education, Health and Care Plans, will retain their charitable business rates relief. By removing the tax breaks enjoyed by most private schools, however, we can invest in our state schools. I'll be able to say to those parents I spoke to in Leeds South West and Morley that we are giving them, their children, the education they deserve. I'll be able to say that we did take the decisive action to break down opportunities for all. And by voting for this bill and the measures in the finance bill, I will be able to say to them that we found the funding to fund our state schools properly. Now, I do know the members opposite are opposed to these changes. However, the Leader of the Opposition has also stated that she does not object to the positive parts of the budget, including our investment in education. So my question to them would be, how are you going to pay for them? What exactly is your plan? We know what you oppose, but what do you support? I think the Conservatives have made something like £12 million of uncosted commitments every single hour since they've elected their new leader. It's hard not to conclude that we are dealing with the same old Conservative party. It is no longer a serious party of government. However, Labour is. Education is central to our mission of expanding opportunity, enriching our society, and empowering our students to be the best possible versions of themselves. Whether they live in Cherwell, Gildersham, East Ardsley, Lofthouse, it doesn't matter. This Labour government is getting on with our mandate of delivering change and ensuring that all of our children have the opportunity to fulfil their true potential. Thank you.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I grew up helping my mum on the shop floor of small gift shops, and the memories I have of the wonderful work she did to build that business, the staff she employed, is something that is a real benefit to my life, but I also saw how hard she worked and how hard things got. She went down from 4 shops to 1, and then she came across that classic problem of whether she was able to keep her shop open and battle with online retailers. The costs went up, business rates were too much, and she decided to close and go online. Now, I am tired, quite frankly, of us not taking support for small businesses strongly enough and actually making a change. And this government had an opportunity to really make a difference, and yet we've squandered this when it comes to business rate reform. And I see that in my high street. So I now have the privilege of representing several magnificent high streets, from Tring, Berkhamsted, Harpenden, Wheatonstead and Redbourne. And I see those businesses struggling yet again. I spoke to Michelle from Gray's Life time and time again about the cost of business rates and the impact that had on her business. Eventually, she has closed her high street shop down. I've also spoken to Peter from the Oakman Group, a booming business that started in Tring in 2007, a rising start that got prizes for being best employees in the country, but from that has now said that we're on the edge of extinction. And when now he employs 1,200 people, he's saying that actually the budget, including business rate change, will have an impact of up to 2 million, and he will look at closing many of his premises.
Give way.
Yes, absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way.
My friend's mentioned several businesses in her constituency that are going to be impacted by this. I was speaking recently to a small restaurant owner in my constituency. They have 6 restaurants across the south of England, and they say that the business rate changes plus other budget measures are going to cost their business £150,000 just to do what they're doing today. So does she agree with me that this is not going to encourage businesses like those to invest in the UK, to open new restaurants and to help grow the economy, which we all want?
Absolutely, and that's the message that I'm getting again and again. And I had another business in Tring who said, I would have loved to open on the high street, but I just can't afford it. Those broken business rates are affecting our businesses, but they're impacting the people who can work there, and they're also impacting our communities that are losing out on fantastic local businesses. Now, the Minister talked about building a confidence to invest, but business rates directly tax capital investment rather than taxing profits or fixed stock of land. This needs to be changed. So what I'm calling for is reiterating that call with the Liberal Democrats for an absolute reform in business rates and calling for a commercial landover levy. That's taxing the land value of commercial sites and not productive investment. That would boost productive investment, support our local businesses and help to bring those communities, those local employees with them as well. And when it comes to schools, today we're talking about charitable rate relief for many of our private schools, and that is going to change. Now, I have many families in my inbox who are writing to me again and again. Yes, I hear the calls across the bench on the other side saying that we need to improve all state schools. Absolutely, I support that. But families right now are making that choice, whether it's about certain special educational needs, whether it's about supporting specialist skills in their children, or simply from bullying. There are many reasons why parents are deciding to send their children to private schools. But I'll leave you with this question. We do have a choice in where we raise that money. Do we really think it's fair that instead of taxing big banks, we're taxing the education of other children to raise all of us?
Which brings us to the front bench spokesman, David Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just a few weeks ago, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, highlighted a £2.4 billion black hole in the local government budget arising from the recent national budget. £3.7 billion of extra spending announced, with only £1.3 billion of funding to pay for it. And here we begin to see how this government proposes to fill that gap. First, Madam Deputy Speaker, they came for the pensioners. Then they came for the farmers. Then they came for the students. Then they came for the employers. And now they're coming for our high streets. They're coming for our pubs, our shops, with another whammy of tax rises. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's not pretend that this is an essential step. The choices that were made by the Chancellor and this government in their budget are driving up inflation, they're driving up borrowing costs, government borrowing a record amount last month. They're driving up employment costs, and councils will be hit, just as they are hitting the rest of our economy. I reflect, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Minister said in 2023 that pubs are the beating heart or the anchor of many communities and the place where people can get together to tackle loneliness and isolation. And indeed, those are sentiments that many members on the benches opposite have expressed in this chamber and in Westminster Hall recently. But all those members who came here to express their support and champion their local pub are about to vote for a bill which on average puts up its taxes by over £5,500 a year. And all this from a government that promised to replace business rates. Indeed, Rachel from Accounts went so far as to promise, I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, Rachel from Complaints Admin, went so far as to promise in 2021 to abolish them. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, all of us will know from personal experience, whether in our own families or in our lives in local government before today, the value that the diversity of our education system brings. And indeed, the huge growth in the number of independent schools in the form of academies started under the last Labour government and developed under the previous government bring to attainment. But we continue to see this spiteful class war attack on schools. And this bill continues Labour's war on education. Now, I know there are a number of members of the Liberal Democrats who've raised the point about Britain's former membership of the European Union. Of course, the measure to become the only country in Europe to tax education would be illegal under EU law. But this bill still does not fully consider the needs of our special needs schools. Many, of course, have a mix of fully private and EHCP-funded pupils, and the balance, Madam Deputy Speaker, will change over time. An example being the Gashare School in my constituency that provides for the very significant end of children on the autistic spectrum. One year they may have nearly 100% private funded, the next year the vast majority education and healthcare plan funded. And this bill simply does not answer the question in a way that is useful to those settings about how they will have to pay their taxes in the future. And we've heard a number of members around the chamber, including on the Labour benches, set out their very serious concerns about the impact on small faith schools, the subject we know of ongoing legal challenges coming the government's way, but something which is incredibly important if we are to have the diverse base of education in our country, in particular that many Muslim communities have struggled to find in the established mainstream state sector to date. And we've had scorn poured on our education system from the benches opposite. And I'd simply remind members on those benches opposite of the transformation in standards in state education that's taken place in the last 14 years. Now, having been a lead member for education in a local authority for the whole of that time, I'm the last person to claim that everything in the state sector was perfect. But the fact that we've seen, Madam Deputy Speaker, such amazing progress on closing the disadvantage attainment gap in England under the previous government, in the context of that progress that we made in those international league tables. The fact that class sizes, when we left office, were stable at 26, less than the statutory limit that was introduced under the previous Labour government. And when we come to ask the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, as in any democracy, does the harm that is done by this policy to some families, to some children's education, is it outweighed by the benefit that it brings? We should reflect that if every single penny raised by all of these policies found its way into state school budgets, something which we already know is not the case, because it's also going to be funding the big increase in Ofsted bureaucracy that the Secretary of State set out for us a few short weeks ago. Even if every single penny were to find its way into state school budgets, it's less than half the cost of a single teacher for each of those state schools at a time when rolls of pupils in England are falling. It is quite clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the motivation for this policy is spite and class war, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the standards in our schools.
Absolutely.
But if that were not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the member for Thirsk and Malton, set out the very serious concerns that we see from across business about this plan, in particular the retail sector and licensed trade, from the Association of Convenience Stores, representing those small corner shops that keep our residents able to access the goods that they need at all hours of night and day, to the very biggest retailers such as Sainsbury's, who've set out in detail the damage that this budget is already doing, and this bill in particular, to workers' pay, to the prospects for investment, to the prospects for pay growth and training and employment growth in this country. And when we reflect on what we can be proud of in the last 14 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, I particularly draw the House's attention to the fact that when we left office, there were 4 million more people in work in this country than when we took office. Youth unemployment was half what it was when we took office. And the proportion of people in this country earning their own living had grown exponentially. And as the members for East Hampshire and South Northamptonshire set out very clearly, they recognise the importance of getting this right for our communities. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to ask, is what is proposed today going to generate the transformation? Well, under the last Conservative government, we saw a 70% increase in school funding over the 14 years in office, 7.9% per pupil growth alone over the last few years, above inflation. So it's very clear that we have a decent and honourable record when it comes to investment in education. But when we look at the impact in particular that this bill will have on our retail sector, the largest part of our private sector employment with nearly 5 million workers, it is clear that from the largest to the smallest in that sector, they are looking at the impact that this will have on their bottom line, and they are translating that into lower jobs, lower growth, less investment. And they are warning this government very clearly, as we do on this side of the House. And I will invite the Minister, will he intervene? Will he tell me, is he willing to promise that the small business rate relief will be maintained? So far, the government's refused to answer that question, which is setting a huge degree of concern amongst small businesses of all kinds up and down on our high streets. And as they move to this introduction of higher multipliers on business rates, we have to ask the question, does this signify, as it may do, that they're also going to move, as the Labour government in Wales has already done, to the introduction of additional higher council tax bans for our residential properties as well? Because it is very clear that as well as coming for the pensioners, for the students, coming for the farmers, coming for the employers, they are coming for every council taxpayer and business rate payer in this country. And that is not, Madam Deputy Speaker, to fill a black hole, because as we know, the black hole does not exist.
Read the OBR report. Read it.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy, and I'll take the hint very much. I'm sure they've read the views of the Office for Budget Responsibility as avidly as we have done on this side. Politics, we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, is about choices. We are proud of the choices that we have made that have enhanced the quality of life and the wages and the economy of our country. We are deeply concerned about the impact that this bill itself and the wider budget of which it is a part will have on our national economy, the prospects of our people. We are concerned about the damage that it does to the life chances of our children, and we are concerned that it continues to leave a black hole in our local government finances. And for those reasons, Madam Deputy Speaker, we recognise this is not really a budget, it is a budget, and that is the reason we will be voting for our reason amendment tonight.
Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I rise to close this debate, and can I start by thanking all members who took part and made contributions to what I thought was an enthusiastic, impassioned, but whether you are from this side of the House or this side of the House, genuinely rooted in the communities where people live and where we represent. And I think, in a way, that brings out the best of Parliament. But we couldn't quite avoid the party politics and the rewriting of history from the party opposite. I mean, shall we really take lessons on saving the high street from the Conservatives that oversaw mass bank closures and the decimation of retail on the high street? Our 6,000 pubs closing from local communities. These are now the farmer's friend. But when they were in government, they saw the oversight of 7,000 agricultural businesses close. Where were they when the energy market was actually decimating farmers, or the labour supply challenges of decimating farmers? They were nowhere to be seen. But now they come riding on the horse. Would you like to intervene? Come in, please.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the Minister will recall, because he was here as I was, the massive intervention that the last government put in place in the energy market to keep our lights on in this country. But will he tell the House, will they keep the small business rates relief? Will he answer that question?
Yes, full time.
I can answer this question. It's the impact that matters. And whatever they say as a farmer's friend, the truth is different, which is that 7,000 businesses closed on their watch. That's what the evidence says. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me move on to the reasoned amendment. This government is fully committed to protecting and supporting our valuable high streets. The fact is that the retail, hospitality and leisure business rate relief was due to end in its entirety by the end of March 25, and that would have meant a cliff edge for businesses. Now, at the budget, we stepped in to prevent that by extending relief further this year by 40% with a cash cap of £110,000. We have also frozen the small business rate multiplier for 25-26, meaning that when taken together with the small business rate relief scheme, over 1 million properties will be protected from any inflationary increases next year. 1 million properties protected by this government. Give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. So, by his logic, are we to assume that support on business rates for hospitality and retail is to end in April 2026?
Yeah. Well, that really wasn't worth giving way for, really. I literally just said that 1 million properties will be supported from inflationary increases next year, that the 40% will continue with a cap of 110. That's exactly what this bill is intended to do, and if he supports it, then he can join the government in the voting lobbies and vote for it. However, we know from businesses that the current scheme of discretionary relief does not provide the certainty needed, and that's why this bill enables a permanent tax cut for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses from 26-27 through new lower multipliers, ending the year-by-year uncertainty that the previous government hardwired into the system. This is doing what businesses have been calling for. That rebalancing of the out-of-town to the in-town, to the online to the on-street, is exactly what people have been calling for in communities and in business, and they know it. The frustration, in a way, is that they didn't do it with the 14 years they had in office, and it's down to us to take the steps that are needed in government now, and we are happy to do that. Now, the Reason Amendment also raises concerns about the impact on the state sector when it comes to the impact on schools. I can assure the House that protecting and improving the state education is at the forefront of our minds in this government. In fact, we estimate that only 2,900 more pupils will enter the state sector as a result of removing the business rate relief for private schools. Now, just to be clear what that means in reality, that goes down to around 300 a year. In any given year across England, there are 60,000 pupils who will move between schools. This is 300. And we need to keep this in context now, because we've heard a lot of scaremongering about what this will mean in terms of the transfer. But that is what the evidence will say. And the evidence is placed in the House of Commons library if members want to take the time after this to go and vote for it. There might even be enough time to find the documents before the vote takes place if they want to bring themselves up to speed on that. But importantly, this is about providing that much-needed investment in the state school sector. Now, just how many parents say, we need specialist support for SEND because the mainstream provision is not adequate? How many parents of their own admission on the other side choose to pay for private education because they don't have faith in the mainstream provision? Despite what the opposition have said about the glory years of the last 14 years, the truth felt by parents and pupils is very different on the ground, and they know that. And so we've got to repair the mainstream provision so parents and pupils can go with confidence to their local school, knowing they'll get the support that are needed. Support for all pupils, not just some. Now, a number of members have mentioned the impact on faith schools, and I want to come for this. Now, of course, we value parental choice, and we understand that. But based on the evidence submitted through the HMT consultation, as well as the analysis undertaken by the Department for Education on removing the charitable rate relief, it's not apparent that private faith schools will be affected any more than non-faith schools in this measure. So when it comes to the evidence of disadvantage, that evidence is going to... I'm going to make progress for the time that I've got to wind up within the 10 minutes. However, the key point here is that all children of compulsory school age are entitled to a state-funded school place if they need one. And all schools, and they know this, are required to follow the Equality Act requirements relating to business values, promoting an environment that encourages respect and tolerance to families of all faiths and none. On SEND provision, and a number of members have mentioned this, quite rightly, it's been a significant part of the debate for understandable reasons. We have ensured on the face of the bill that private schools that are charities that wholly or mainly provide education for pupils with education, health and care plans remain eligible for business rate charitable relief. Furthermore, private schools that benefit from existing rate exemptions for properties that are wholly used for the training and welfare of disabled people will continue to do so too. Taken together, we believe, as a result, most private educational needs schools will not be affected by these measures at all. Now, we do recognise that some pupils with special educational needs and disabilities will be in private schools, but without local authority funding in place, as their child needs is judged, can be provided within the state sector. Now, parents, of course, will still be free to make that choice about whether to be in the state sector or to retain in the private sector, and that's a very important point to make. Local authorities aim to process all education, health and care plan applications in time for the start of next school year, but in special cases, the local authority is able to repay one-term fees in the process if it's not complete. Likewise, some private schools will forgo the first term's fees for pupils that are expected to receive their education, health and care plan in the future. I'm going to move on now to high streets. Now, the government is committed, wholly committed to rejuvenating our high streets. We want to support the businesses and communities that make our town centres successful. That is why, through this bill, the government intends to introduce permanently lower rates for retail, hospitality and leisure from 26-27 to protect the high street. A tax cut that will be fully funded and sustained through a higher tax for the most expensive properties, just 1% of properties with a rateable value of £500,000 or more. The new tax rates will be set out at next year's budget to factor in the business rate revaluation outcomes and the broader economic and fiscal context at that time. Now, just on our manifesto, we were clear in our manifesto that we will look at the business rate system and we will support our high streets too, and we mean that. We know that our high streets and our town centres are the beating heart of our communities, but frankly, over the last 14 years, they have struggled to keep their head above water. Think about all those household names that have gone to the wall, something of the past and not the future. Think about all the banks that have closed or the pubs that have closed, where the shutters are down on shop premises that were once the lifeblood of where people live. The previous government had 14 years to get this right, and they oversaw decline and the decimation of our high streets. And people feel it. People feel it in their hearts because the town centres are more than just a place to do business. They're a place for communities to come together. And that's something the Tories never understood when they were in government, but it's something that this government absolutely does. Now, with the leave of this House, I want to thank all the honourable members who have contributed to this important debate. This bill is a first step on the road to transform the business rate system. The measure within will provide certainty and support to our vibrant high streets, enabling the delivery of a permanent tax cut that is sustainable and finally levels the playing field between the high street and online. It will also help to break down barriers to opportunity, supporting all parents to achieve their aspiration for children. And we need to bear in mind, of course, that the vast majority, over 90% of children in this country, are in state schools. And this investment will see them given the support that they absolutely need and deserve, and frankly have waited a long time for. I commend this bill to the House.
Order. The original question was that the bill be now read a second time, since when an amendment has been proposed, as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! I think the noes have it. Division, clear the lobby. Is as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes are Greg Smith and James Wilde. Tellers for the noes are Anna Turley and Keir Mather. in Portcullis House, I'm going to allow an additional 1 minute for this division. Order.
The ayes to the right, 173. The noes to the left, 335.
The ayes were 173, the noes 335. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no? No. Tell us for the ayes are Anna Turley and Keir Mather. Tell us for the noes, Greg Smith and James Wilde. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 336. The noes to the left, 175.
Ayes were 336 and the noes were 175. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock. Which brings us to the programme motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Money motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Ways and means motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes